Thank you all for joining us this morning. My name is Christy Edwards. I'm the Deputy Head of the Tolerance and Non-Discrimination Department here at ODIHR. And today for working session 14 on the specially selected topic of hate crime, we are going to discuss on how OSCE participating states comply with their hate crime commitments vis-a-vis the OSCE and the international community in general, and how OSCE and other intergovernmental stakeholders uphold their role in collaborating closely and effectively to address hate crime. So the questions that will be addressed today include, how do OSCE participating states comply with their commitments under the OSCE Ministerial Decision 909 and other decisions relating to preventing and responding to hate crimes and discrimination in general? In particular, how are OSCE participating states ensuring cooperation in addressing hate crimes at the international multilateral level? And how do the OSCE and other relevant intergovernmental organizations uphold their role to support states in a collaborative manner and without duplication in complying with their commitments to address hate crime? And what are the ways forward to strengthening existing collaboration? So we have a wonderful speaker here with us today, and I'm honored to introduce Maria Teresa Verdugo Moreno. Since 2019, she's been a member of the UN CERD Committee on behalf of Spain. Maria is the head of the Economic Crimes Section at the Prosecutor's Office in Malaga, Spain, a member of the National Network of Hate Crime Prosecutors of Spain, and a special prosecutor for hate crimes and against discrimination at the Prosecutor's Office in Malaga, Spain. She is one of the first hate crime prosecutors in Spain, has been trained by ODIHR as a PACT trainer, and apart from her lectures delivered to prosecutors and judges in Spain throughout her career, has conducted a number of ODIHR hate crime trainings for prosecutors, judges, and police officers in the OSCE region between 2015 and 2019. During the period from 2014 to 2016, Ms. Verdugo Moreno was a member of the Working Party on Improving Hate Crime Reporting and Recording, organized by EUFRA. So Ms. Verdugo Moreno, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. It's a great honor to participate in this meeting, and I'm deeply thankful that I have been invited to share some of the reflections that have arisen from my participation in international organizations, as well as from my work as a hate crime prosecutor. The idea that all human beings are equal in dignity and rights, and that discrimination between persons on the grounds of race, color, gender, sexual orientation, or ethnic origin is an obstacle both to friendly and peaceful relations among nations and to the harmony of persons living side by side, even within one and the same state, has been a constant in all national and international laws since the middle of the last century. We find that idea in the Universal Declaration of the Human Rights, in the European Convention of Human Rights, in the Helsinki Final Act, and in the Charter of Fundamental Rights of the European Union. Although the concept of hate crimes was not formally included in these resolutions, it was clear from the beginning that disregard and contempt for human rights could result in various acts that could jeopardize peace and freedom. Because hate crimes attack dignity and equality that are the axis around which the entire system of fundamental rights is built, eradicating them should also be a must for all the states. In order to ensure compliance with these principles and obligations and to accomplish these goals, all these international organizations have issued a series of recommendations, guidelines, and case law addressed to the respective states. I will try to reflect on how those different regulations of the various international organizations coexist, which are the best examples of synergies between them, and how that cooperation could be improved. Although, as I've said before, the fight against discrimination has been a common concern for all the international organizations, the primary responsibility for providing security, freedom, and dignity for the citizens lies with the individual states, which are accountable to the citizens and responsible to each other for implementation of the commitments and obligations under international law. In order to help those countries so they can comply with the commitment, the OSCE, a pioneer in the fight against hate crimes, has carried out several initiatives so that the intended aims could be achieved. For a start, At the 11th meeting of the Ministerial Council in December 2003, the ODIHR was tasked, in cooperation inter alia with the CERT or with the ECRI, with serving as a collection point for information and statistics collected by participating states. The states also made a commitment to enact and strengthen legislation that prohibits discrimination based on or incitement to hate crimes. Later on, they also took another step in the fight against crimes motivated by prejudice with the Decision 9 in 2009, where the first and only international definition of hate crimes was introduced, and a call was made to the participating states to, among other, collect, maintain, and make public reliable data and statistics about hate crime, enact a specific legislation to combat hate crimes, take measures to encourage victims to report hate crimes, and develop professional training and capacity building activities for law enforcement, judges, and prosecutors. In the same way that the values and principles contained in the international declarations coincide, so we can see that the guidelines and the tasks directed to the states from other international organizations are frequently similar. In that sense, the Article 4A of the International Convention for the Elimination of Racial Discrimination of the United Nations says that the state's party undertake to declare an offense punishable by law all acts of violence or incitement to such acts against any race or group of persons of another color or ethnic origin. And in the same line, the EU Framework Decision 2008-913 states that each member state shall take the measures necessary to punish hate crimes and incitement to violence against a group of persons defined by reference to race, color, religion, descent, or origin. The ECRI, in the Council of Europe, has also called for the criminalization of such acts in the general policy recommendation. So we can see that in the practice, that will be the case of Spain, a country may have ratified various instruments of international law that relate to different geographical divisions of which they are part. So although the requirements may be common, a specific response is requested from each state. The principle and the goals may be the same, and the obligations may coincide, but the fact that each will require that the state gives account to all these commitments can sometimes be overwhelming. On the other hand, when different organizations cooperate with each other, when the state can integrate various initiatives and solutions from one organization to respond to the demands made by the other, very satisfactory results can be achieved. Thus, in the last session of the CERT, during the constructive dialogue that was established with the respective delegation, in the course of which the countries accredit that they are materializing the principles of the Convention, this could be verified. For instance, the case of Iceland, the fact that it participated in the no hate speech movement enforced by the Council of Europe, or that it has implemented the directives of year 2000 regarding equal treatment in employment and equal treatment regardless of race, were presented by the country as steps taken in the direction of fulfilling with the demands of the committee. Another good example of cooperation among regional human rights mechanisms could be the general recommendations issued by the CERT that contribute to update, improve, and adapt the principles of the Convention at the present time. During the last session, a number of contributions from member states, UN specialized agencies, national human rights institutions, NGOs, and other stakeholders were received in order to help in the making of the General Recommendation number 36 on preventing and combating racial profiling. Among them, the participation of the FRA stood up, as one of whose representatives came to the last third session to illustrate the committee on the recently issued guide Preventing Unlawful Profiling Today and in the Future, so that the final result could be as homogeneous as possible with the conclusions and parameters used by that organization. Another key contribution came precisely by the ODIHR, which conducted a paragraph-by-paragraph study based on the draft provided by the CERT, clarifying and correcting some of its conclusions. This type of work in common, where the contributions of some enrich the works of others, are fundamental in the creation of a harmonious, orderly, and easily compliant international body of law for the states. In its role of supporting the states in their efforts to meet the wide range of commitments regarding the fight against hate crime, the OSCE has launched in the last 15 years a series of initiatives of undeniable practical value that have made a difference and that have allowed a significant breakthrough in the fight against those horrific crimes. All those efforts have served not only so that the states have been able to meet the requirement of the OSCE, but also of other organizations. It happens with the collecting and publishing hate crime data, and the OSCE, for instance, has also published a practical guide precisely for hate crime data collection and monitoring mechanism. We also owe them the practical guide for hate crimes law from 2009, and a number of other practical guides focused on specific hate crimes. But when talking about helping states to materialize the commitments adopted and to fight effectively against hate crime, the contribution that stands up, in my personal opinion, is surely the implementation of training programs, namely the TACL and the Pact for Law Enforcement and Prosecutors. We have to keep in mind that, as the general recommendation of the third number 13 stated, the states party have not only to enact appropriate legislation, but also to ensure that it's effectively enforced. The European Court of Human Rights has also ruled that even when a country lacks of proper hate crimes legislation, harmful behaviors that are based in discrimination must be investigated and punished specifically. So if we take into account that in the end, those who are dedicated to investigating and prosecuting crimes, those who enforce the law, are law enforcement agents and prosecutors mainly, the fact that they have specific training on legal tools available, that they know the obligations that the respective countries have contracted, and that they are aware of the damage that these crimes cause to the society they serve is essential so that all other commitments can materialize. That idea, and that I will put my prosecutor hat on, takes me to the last part of this speech and to point out what would be, in my opinion, the main problem regarding international cooperation. We have seen that the states are subject to a series of obligations imposed by the organizations of which they are part, and that the OSCE has a key role in helping them to comply with them. But it seems to me that sometimes it is forgotten that in the end, is the officials in charge of the investigation and prosecution of the crimes, the agents in the field, that end up carrying out the policies that the organizations design. Without them, the work can be done. But most of the time, they are asked to do an increasingly number of tasks without knowing why. That should change. If civil servants and any other relevant actors do not understand that the good performance of the functions plays a fundamental role in achieving the goals we had set, we will never achieve them. If those who fill in the form for statistical purposes don't understand the utility of the task, they won't do it correctly. If those who take a report from a victim aren't aware of what a hate crime is and how to uncover it, they won't ask the needed questions. If we enact a number of anti-discrimination laws without training judges and prosecutors who value diversity and respect dignity, those laws will never be applied. So it doesn't matter, or not so much, how interactive and agile the dialogue between the international organizations and the states party is. It doesn't matter how good the guides and tools provided by them are, or how efficient the International Relations Office of the state in question is. If we take a look again at the commitment made by the states party within the OSCE framework, we realize that they cannot be fulfilled without taking into account this last link in the chain. That's why initiatives like the Pact or the TACL are so important, because they link directly the supranational organizations with the agent responsible for making the commitments made by the states a reality. In that sense, to eradicate the hate crimes, if that ever can be achieved, is key that the IGOs and the states parties raise awareness among their officials about their obligations and the reason for them, and provide them with tools that allow them to comply with them easily and effectively. Very good has already been done in the last years, and many goals have been accomplished. It may be time now to harmonize it, to homogenize it, and above all, to make it accessible to those who work daily in the seek for justice, and with the invaluable help of civil society, for those who suffer and have until now remained silent. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much for your incredible remarks. Now I would like to make a couple of technical announcements. And of course, we appreciate the discussions and participation that all of you will have to add, not only on any experience that you all have on the tools that ODIHR has had to offer, as we heard from our introducer, but ways in which the in multilateral and international organizations can work together to be more effective and cooperative in their efforts, and as well as how they implement these efforts in your participating states. So we have about 2 hours and 45 minutes for the speakers list, and during that time we'll have about 15 to 20 minutes at the end for delegations from participating states to exercise their right of reply, and if there's time we will hear a final summary of reflections from the introducer, and we will close promptly at 1 o'clock, given the strict time requirements for the interpreters, who are doing an excellent job. So for today's session, the speaking time for the speakers list is limited to 3 minutes, and I would like to take this opportunity to remind all participants that all interventions should be presented in a meaningful, orderly, and respectful manner, observing the time limit and focusing on recommendations relating to the topic of the session. And I will remind everyone that the topic is related to hate crimes and the role that international organizations play. Please keep your comments brief and to the point, starting with the recommendations related to the session's topic. Please also remember that criticism is welcome but should be constructive, and we encourage participants not to read lengthy prepared statements, but those of you who have prepared statements can submit them before they take the floor to the interpreters, and you can also submit your statements and distribute them through the document distribution desk to ensure that the flow of documents reflects the discussions. I would also like to remind all participants that you can only speak in the capacity in which you are registered, and only entities registered on the speakers list can take the floor. I will also remind representatives of participating states that points of order can only relate to procedural matters. When it comes to the substance of the matter under discussion, you are welcome to exercise your right of reply. So we will start with France on behalf of the European Union, followed by the United States of America.
Madam Moderator, it's my honor to make this statement on behalf of the European Union. The following states associate themselves with this: North Macedonia, Montenegro, Serbia, Albania, Bosnia-Herzegovina, Liechtenstein, Moldova, Georgia, and Andorra. The European Union is based on the values of human dignity, equality, and respect for human rights and fundamental freedoms, as enshrined in particular in the European Convention of Human Rights and reaffirmed in the Charter of Fundamental Rights of the European Union. Physical or verbal aggression, crimes motivated by racism, xenophobia, intolerance, anti-Semitism, or discrimination on the basis of ethnic origin, religion, or convictions, disability, age, sexual orientation, or gender identity are an affront to the fundamental values of the European Union and, of course, of the OSCE. They are not only an attack on the victim or persons identified with the victim, but also human collectivity as a whole, by undermining the cohesion that is necessary for our social contract. And that is why hate crimes must not remain unpunished. And there are two major challenges in this respect. The first is underreporting. Today, many hate crimes cannot be prosecuted because they're not reported, and so they become invisible, even for the prosecuting authorities, and therefore leaving victims with no way of obtaining reparation for their suffering. The second challenge is that of combating hateful content and racist content on the internet, which is growing, and that is very a cause of great concern. We must collectively reinforce the means and methods that we have to combat hate online, together with digital companies. Hate crimes are a threat to peace and security in the OSCE area, and they concern all participating states with no differentiation. The European Union bases its work on the effective diagnostic instrument that we have in the European Union, namely the Fundamental Rights Agency, and whose reports give us a sense of how much hate crimes there are in Europe. The European Union has put in place a solid legal framework with its framework decision of 2008. Now, we need to work cooperate with the ODIHR and fully support its activities to prevent hate crimes. In this respect, we strongly encourage participating states to communicate to ODIHR all pertinent data in order to feed into the annual report on hate crime. We believe that there should also be teaching of diversity, dialogue, tolerance, and there must be denunciation of acts that are motivated by hatred and recognize the positive contributions that all individuals can make to a pluralist and harmonious society. Other recommendations that we have will be on the webpage of the conference. Thank you.
I now call on the United States of America, followed by the Russian Federation.
Thank you, moderator. Hate crimes have no place in society. They violate the law, hurt their victims, and harm all of us by eroding both our core values and civic trust. Over the past 2 years, more than 300 lives were tragically lost in places of worship in New Zealand, Sri Lanka, and the United States. There have also been earlier incidents at houses of worship in the United Kingdom, France, and Canada. The OSCE's Supplementary Human Dimension meeting in April focused on religious intolerance and highlighted comprehensive approaches that bring together government institutions, international organizations, criminal justice systems, and civil society, including religious actors. The United States has made hate crimes prosecutions a priority. Between January 2017 and August 2019, the Justice Department charged more than 55 defendants with hate crimes and obtained convictions of more than 50. The Department of Justice successfully prosecuted an Ohio man who drove his car into a crowd of protesters in Charlottesville, Virginia, and killed a peaceful protester on August 12, 2017. And in March of this year, he pleaded guilty to 29 federal hate crimes and was sentenced to life in prison. In November 2017, the department sent an experienced and highly respected prosecutor to assist with the prosecution of 2 Iowa men charged in state court with murdering a teenager who identified as gender fluid. Both defendants were found guilty and will now spend the rest of their lives behind bars. We use our law enforcement resources to identify situations of concern before violence and injury can happen. In 2018, the Justice Department secured the convictions of 3 men who conspired to bomb an apartment complex in Kansas, where a large number of Somali immigrants lived. We are focusing on improving our hate crime data collection and training hundreds of law enforcement agencies across our country to improve reporting. According to the FBI's 2017 hate crime statistics, almost 60% of crimes based on religious bias in the United States were committed by individuals alleged to have an anti-Jewish bias. This represents a 37% increase over the prior year. So in order to address this trend, the Department of Justice held a summit on combating anti-Semitism on July 15th that featured discussion among government officials, academic experts, media commentators, and Jewish community representatives. And it is our hope that such initiatives will help reduce the number of these despicable crimes in the future. Thank you, moderator.
Thank you. I now call on the Russian Federation, followed by Political Movement Group 24.
Madam Moderator, colleagues, the issue of hate crime is becoming increasingly acute in the OSCE. In some countries, this is occurring with the connivance of the authorities. Not only are the authorities not taking measures to prevent racism and intolerance, this being done in the name of the absolute right to freedom of expression, but some authorities are also condoning these acts. The relentless rise of hate crime targeting different races, nationalities, religious groups, and other minorities in the United States is linked to the current migration policy being adopted by Washington. For instance, high-ranking politicians have also expressed such views. Tragic events in El Paso, Dayton, and California, according to some journalists and human rights defenders, were the consequence of the authorities' anti-migrant sentiment. Also, the disproportionate use of force by law enforcement authorities also contributed to the rise of intolerance in the U.S. Human rights defenders have noted that the police can do no wrong, and this feeds into racial stereotypes. We're also concerned about the rise of xenophobic and racist incidents in the EU. This is a consequence of the West's meddling in the internal affairs of many countries, which has also brought about the European migration crisis. This has resulted in a serious uptick in intolerance in European states. A recent report by the EU Fundamental Rights Agency, dated 2018, stated that in the EU, the number of incidents of violence targeting migrants has risen, including acts committed by policemen and border officers. In the UK in 2017-2018, there's been a substantial rise in the number of hate crimes. And the absolute majority of these incidents are crimes motivated by hate. Many of them target refugees. In Canada, we've seen chauvinism on the rise and more violence targeting Indigenous peoples. According to the Broken Trust report of the Office of the Independent Review Director, all of the law enforcement officers in Thunder Bay in the province of Ontario are susceptible to systematic racism. This prevents objective and comprehensive investigation of cases targeting Indigenous persons. In Ukraine, we've seen the central government condone atrocities being committed by groups which are attacking migrants, Muslim and Roma, with impunity. In today's society, this issue deserves the full attention of OSCE participating states. In order to achieve results, we need a systematic, a responsible approach. This is underpinned by a conscious stance. We must say that it is unacceptable to promote or to ignore these trends. We also need to stop them in their tracks. The governing bodies of the OSCE, ODIHR, the representative on the freedom of the media, the HCNM must assist us in this endeavour in keeping with their mandates. I'll be submitting the full text of my statement to the Secretariat. Thank you.
Thank you. I now call on Political Movement Group 24, followed by Salud et Misericorde. Apologies.
Thank you very much, Moderator. Ladies and gentlemen, my name is Oysidi from the Political Movement Group 24. In Tajikistan, torture is continuing to be used. Most cases of torture are irregular and not systematic. Now, what does that mean? In fact, I can tell you that there is a systemic form of torture which is applied in the places of detention of Tajikistan.
Thank you. I now pass the floor back to the speaker and remind the speaker that the topic is on the participating states' compliance with the commitments to address hate crimes and the respective role of intergovernmental organizations. Thank you.
On the very first day when they find themselves in an isolation cell, new detainees are subject to massive beatings.
I have reminded him to speak on the topic, but I need to let him actually finish a sentence before I can determine whether or not he's speaking on the topic. I will also remind you that substantive points of order can be raised in your right of reply. I'll now pass the floor back to the speaker.
Now, those who have come newly into a place of detention are taken to a premise called the Stakanchik, and that is a place where detainees are stripped, and when they're naked, their clothing and personal effects are checked, and then they are taken to their cells. But that's what should be done in accordance with the rules. But in fact, they are beaten by almost the entire staff of the place of detention before they're taken to a cell.
And with all respect to his speech, he is speaking out of topic. And it has no relation with hate crimes now. Thank you.
Thank you. The point of order is noted, but I will remind the representative from Tajikistan that any substantive remarks can be made in your right of reply. This is not a procedural point of order. Thank you. I will also take the opportunity to remind the speaker that you need to address the topic at hand, which is the state's compliance with commitments to address hate crime and the respective role of intergovernmental organizations. Thank you.
Particularly severe beatings are the lot of those who are suspected of crimes against the authorities on the basis of the articles about extremism, terrorism, being a mercenary, calling for overthrowing the authorities, and so on. And these are people who are still under investigation. They're under suspicion. And they are very severely beaten, not only by hands, but also with the use of rubber truncheons. Similar things occur everywhere, in all places of detention of Tajikistan. This practice has been preserved from the times of the Gulag.
Can I ask you to listen to translation?
I am
Thank you.
listening to the translation, and I will remind the speaker that the point of order needs to be on procedural matters.
Yes,
I will
and he's
also
speaking out of topic, absolutely.
I will also remind the speaker that you need to address hate crimes, the role of the participating states, and how international or intergovernmental organizations can address these issues. Thank you.
Now, those who are in charge of the penitentiary system of Tajikistan are not doing anything to do away with this phenomenon. This phenomenon really is systemic. It is done in all places of detention in Tajikistan. The evidence given by former detainees is identical in all cases. This way of working applies in all regions of Tajikistan. And this is the main reason why there have been so many rebellions in the prisons of Tajikistan.
Procedural point
I
of
ask
order?
you, really, I kindly ask you to listen to translation. With all respect to him, he is speaking out of topic. So please,
You can exercise your
attention.
right of reply at the end of the session, and we will note that you're interested in using your right of reply. I also recognize a point of order from Canada.
On the procedural matter, which you have already done, I would also remind our colleague from Tajikistan that point of orders are for procedural matters and not for comments being made.
Thank you. Turn the floor back to the speaker and remind the speaker once again to please make sure that your comments are specifically related to the participating states' compliance with the commitments to address hate crimes and the respective role of intergovernmental organizations.
Well, I would remind the delegation of Tajikistan that this is what is going on in that country. Now, we recommend that the participating states of the OSCE insist that the authorities of Tajikistan carry out a fundamental reform of the penitentiary and do away with the torturing and inhuman forms of dealing with detainees. Access should be given to places of detention in Tajikistan for civil society and mass media in order to monitor how detainees are being treated. Thank you.
A Meziricol, followed by Serbia.
Ma recommandation,
My recommendation is that Article 20 of the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights be applied to the Quran. According to this article, any appeal for national, racial, or religious hatred which constitutes an incitement to discrimination, to hostility, or to violence is prohibited by law, or at least that the publication of the Quran be accompanied with a warning and some critical commentary. On 5 July last, France has prohibited the dissemination of a work to teach Islam to children because, and I quote, it contains statements that could incite to discrimination or hatred vis-à-vis individuals who do not practice Wahhabi Islam promoted by the work, and therefore this work presents a danger for minors who might acquire or consult it. Now, we are grateful to the French Ministry of Internal Affairs for this public order measure, but are Muslim terrorists not indoctrinated by the same teaching that is to be found in this work? In fact, of the 6,000 1,235 verses of the Quran, 1,100 are violent diatribes expressing insults and hatred and against an undefined category of miscreants. 1,500 are violent insults against pagans and idolaters. 250 call for the jihad, that is a perpetual and universal war against the non-Muslim world. 200 specifically concern Jews, and about 100 Christians. All in all, then, 3,150 verses, more than half of the work, call for the execration of non-Muslims, expressing the nefarious intention of fighting them to death. I would quote one of them: the reward of those who refuse Islam is that they be killed or crucified, or that their hand and the opposite foot be cut off, that they be expelled from the earth. And that is Quran 5:33, end of quote. Now, if one half of the Quran is a denial then of the moral values, whether secular or religious, of the West, and one could find at least 400 of them, which are very serious crimes under the French criminal code, because they are provocations to crimes and offenses against individual. And therefore it is obvious that the Quran should not be printed, disseminated, or taught. That should be prohibited. How can it be that member states and signers of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights are so disinterested in the Quran? The law should be applied, and once again, if there is not a prohibition of the publication of the Quran, it should at least be accompanied by a warning and critical commentary. Thank you.
Pass the floor to Serbia, followed by the Institute of Legal Policy and Social Protection, named in the honor of Irina Berezhna.
Thank you. The Constitution of the Republic of Serbia in particular guarantees the preservation of human dignity and the realization of the full freedom of equality of every individual in a just, open, and democratic society based on the rule of law principle, limiting them only in cases of endangering human rights just guaranteed. The Constitution specifically provides for the prohibition of discrimination by setting forth that everyone is equal before the Constitution and the law, and that everyone has the right to equal legal protection without discrimination. According to the current criminal code, the legislative profile of the Republic of Serbia is in line with the principles of the European Convention of Human Rights, so that incrimination has been extended with regard to hate crime and hate speech, so that sanctions are applied not only to the spread of racial, national, or religious intolerance, but also any other intolerance that results in violence based on different beliefs, lifestyles, sexual orientation, and other differences. In December 2012, the National Assembly of the Republic of Serbia adopted law on amendments to the criminal code, which introduced via Article 54A hate crime motivated by race, religion, national or ethnic origin, gender, sexual orientation, or gender identity as a mandatory aggravating circumstance in determining the punishment of the offender. Effective prosecution and adequate sanctioning of hate crimes contributed to a deterring effect that criminal sanctions have on perpetrators and potential perpetrators, and at the same time sends a message to the victims and the society as a whole that any form of violent manifestation of intolerance is unlawful and punishable. All through the amendments to the criminal code have entered into force more than 5 years ago, the practices both of public prosecutors' offices and courts continue to indicate a certain lack of clarity of legislation that hinders proper implementation of Article 54A. It is for this reason that guidelines for criminal prosecution of hate crimes were created, which we are pleased to present at a side event, which we are organizing in the Hall 3 from 1:15 to 2:45 p.m. For the same reason, the Office for Human and Minority Rights, in cooperation with the OSCE mission to Serbia, for the past 6 years has been organizing coordination meetings of representatives of competent state bodies and civil society organizations for the purpose of preventing hate crimes in the Republic of Serbia. The purpose of those meetings is to continue cooperation, to share experience, and to explore possibilities for closer cooperation between the competent state authorities and civil society in order order to prevent hate crimes in the Republic of Serbia. At the end of this presentation, I would like to invite you all once again to the side event that we are organizing in the Hall 3 from 1:15 to 2:45, and where we will be happy to answer all your questions. Thank you.
I now pass the floor to the Institute of Legal Policy and Social Protection, named in the honor of Irina Berezhna. And apologies if I mispronounce the next speaker's name, but the next speaker after this coming up speaker will be Bevigan Glaisha Moglish Katan for all. And apologies again if I mispronounced that.
I head up the Ukrainian policy of the Ukrainian Institute of Legal Policy and Social Protection, the Irina Berezhna Institute. I want to talk about the way this meeting is organized. We're discussing discrimination, but we're seeing discrimination here at this meeting today at one of the side events organized by the US State Department. We're going to consider respect for rights and freedoms in Crimea, and there's only going to be Ukrainian and English spoken at that meeting. However, Ukrainian is not a language of the OSCE. Yesterday, we had someone speaking Turkish at this meeting. And this was allowed, although it was said that this is not an OSCE official language. I call for you to put an end to this discrimination and give the opportunity for all to speak Russian at this meeting. There are 7 other people aside from myself who have expressed their desire to speak Russian. That way, we can debunk all of the fake news being peddled by the international community.
Is the participating states' compliance with the commitments to address hate crime and the respective role of intergovernmental organizations. So if you have any specific recommendations to make on this topic, we'd appreciate hearing them. Thank you.
Yes. You just took some time away from me, so could you please add the time back so I have 3 minutes. Recommendations. As things stand, we meet here every year and discuss hate crime. Hate crime is occurring in Ukraine because there's a Nazi ideology being supported by the government in Ukraine, and hate crimes are being committed on a daily basis. We discuss this here every year, but the OSCE hasn't done nothing, zilch, in order to resolve this issue. On an annual basis, the UNGA has been adopted resolutions on the glorification of Nazism. And last year, I gave a report at one of the side events about the fact that Nazism in Ukraine is a threat to the EU. And on the 25th of October last year, European parliamentarians adopted a resolution covering neo-Nazism in EU countries. And in fact, they took parts of my report word for word, including it in their report. So perhaps the OSCE, perhaps ODIHR can finally take up this issue, neo-Nazism, which in fact fuels hate crime. I myself am a human rights defender, and I have seen neo-Nazism committed by Ukrainians and the Ukrainian government. And in fact, in many cases, I had green liquid that's impossible to wash out, Zilonka, poured over me. I am unable to attend court proceedings where there are discussions about, and in fact I've won some court cases, and there were people supporting the Third Reich. Everyone who's in favor of Nazi Germany is considered an enemy at the state level. Anyone who abhors Nazi crimes. Also, a bridge was mined a couple of weeks ago, and it took hours to clear that mine because the Ministry of Internal Affairs did not do anything for hours, and this is the situation in Ukraine.
The next speaker is Bevigan Glaisha Moglish Katan for all, followed by the NGO Anti-Fascist Human Rights League. Thank you.
Good morning, Madam Moderator. Equal opportunities for all. At the outset, I have some recommendations for the delegation of Uzbekistan. Colleagues, I suggest that you put an end to the persecution of Mahmoud Rajabov, a journalist. When he arrived in Tashkent at the airport in May of this year, several opposition poetry books were found in his luggage, and criminal charges were brought against him as a result. The charges have not been dropped. Most recently, he was beaten and arrested. I call on you also to free the blogger, Ms. Aloshukurov, apologies. She was arrested on the 23rd of September. She was beaten. Currently, she is in detention. And what was her crime? In fact, she was reporting on a demonstration. I insist that you put an end to the persecution of bloggers and journalists reporting on the political life of Uzbekistan. They're trying to improve things, but they're being stripped of the opportunity to do that. They're being fined. Exorbitant fines are being levied, although all they're doing is exercising their citizens' rights, their duties. They're simply doing their jobs. I insist that you give citizenship back to Ms. Esheva and to other citizen activists who are, in fact, political migrants who've migrated for political reasons. I also call on you to stop committing violent acts against Ms. Karimova. Let her see her relatives. Let her see her lawyer. Recommendations for the U.S. delegation. We suggest that you ask for the extradition of Ms. Karimova to the United States. In Uzbekistan, she will not get a fair trial. The case against her is politically motivated. She has been tortured, although she is, in fact, a very valuable witness. She has been charged with a number of crimes, for instance, money laundering all over the world. The people of Uzbekistan, just like myself, everyone in this room, have the right to know what really happened in the Gulnara Karimova case. Thank you for your kind attention, and I hope that the Uzbek delegation will listen very carefully to what I've just said.
Now call on the NGO Anti-Fascist Human Rights League, followed by the United Left Party of Estonia.
Dear participants, I've already mentioned this point, but I'd like to report once again that after 2014 in Ukraine, there is a real renaissance of neo-Nazi radical movements which have now penetrated the authorities and are funded by the Ministry of Youth and Sport or from budgets of municipal councils. And there is complete impunity. There is no punishment by the Ukrainian authorities of these neo-Nazi groups that are recognized to be neo-Nazi by Transparency International and other reputable groups. There's no investigation. The year of Bandera was declared recently. And this event was simply ignored. And there is a celebration of the jubilees of individuals who have participated in similar events.
The decision 476 and para 5 of Annex 3 that moderators of the human dimension meetings are encouraged to adopt a proactive attitude to help to ensure that the participants engage in constructive debate aimed at improving the implementation of CE commitments. I do ask you that you did it once, but all the participants should show respect to the participating states here at the table. We have the topic hate crime. Probably they don't understand, they didn't read annotated agenda, but I do ask the participant to show respect to participating states who come here for the dialogue, but the dialogue on the topic of today, but not topic of yesterday or the day before yesterday. I thank you.
Thank you. I will also remind the speaker that the topic is the participating states' compliance with the commitments to address hate crimes and the respective role of intergovernmental organizations, and ask that the speaker make specific recommendations related to the topic of today's session. Thank you.
Dear moderator, I would like to draw attention to the fact that I am representing the Anti-Fascist League. And in the history of mankind, Nazis have committed crimes that were based on hatred. So I think that this is very much on the subject. There's hatred expressed in Ukraine against Africans, against Roma, and many others. These neo-Nazi organizations are being supported by the official authorities of the country, and the representative of Ukraine should be ashamed of this indubitable fact. In August of this year, neo-Nazis celebrated with swastika symbols, and they referred to the ethnic origin of the president, in fact, and there were crimes based on racial hatred. I would draw attention to the fact that in Ukraine, crimes of this kind remain uninvestigated when they are committed against, for instance, Arabic students. The police writes this down as a hooligan act, rather than taking into consideration the fact that violence has been committed because of or on the basis of racial hatred or ethnic origin. So in Ukraine, there is an article, 161, in the Criminal Code prohibiting incitement to racial hatred and other forms of hatred, but this is applied only to journalists and bloggers and anyone else who is in opposition vis-à-vis the authorities. A number of journalists have been subject to these kinds of charges.
Information and educational institution, relevant concept.
Благодарю, госпожа модератор.
Thank you, Madam Moderator. Ladies and gentlemen, I think from the last few speakers, we can clearly see that we need a separate day at our meeting, an extra day dedicated to the topic of neo-Nazism. Because, in fact, we've seen a qualitative step change in hate crime. This was mentioned last year. That's what the speaker spoke about when she mentioned the European Parliament. We have seen neo-Nazism on the rise in Europe, so it's a fairly pressing issue. Turning now to hate crime. Let me remind you that these crimes are in fact twofold. First of all, incitement to hatred, and also the crimes motivated by hate themselves. And in fact, they're rather different crimes. Now, I needed to explain that in order to be able to prove that in practice what we've seen is a strange cocktail of these two kinds of crimes. As a result, some are not being held to account, some committing one type of crime, and other people committing the other type of crime are being held to account. First of all, inciting hatred. Article 155 of the Estonian Criminal Code. It says that these crimes result to threats to life, to people's health, and to property. Now, this is erroneous. The European Commission on Racism and Intolerance has drawn attention to this, as has the UN Committee on Racial Discrimination. We urge Estonia to change the wording of this law. The Minister of Justice, in fact, responded to the Commission's report and said that he will speak to the prosecutor in order to change the crime so it is material, not simply officious. Now, the lawyers in the room might laugh. What we also have is a letter to the Estonian president. Now, this letter says that 30 years have gone by, and now it seems that it's acceptable for people to have their reputation tarnished, and certain statements are being made. For instance, some are considered a cancer in our society. It's not only the yellow press which peddles these views. Some politicians say this in Parliament. And clearly we can see that we're very far from an ideal situation. The President of the Russian Federation has already noted this. He said that we need to cast off this scourge. I'm referring to the application of Article 282 of the Criminal Code of Estonia.
Information and
Thank you.
institution, relevant concept, followed by Sanzidan.
Thank you very much, moderator, dear colleagues. Good morning. I would like to draw attention to the situation of hate crimes committed against ethnic Russians who live temporarily or permanently on the territory of Poland. The policy of the Polish authorities is to distribute the so-called Polish card to individuals who have Polish ethnic origin. But according to various estimates, there are some 3 million people who are not Poles living in Poland. They're mostly Ukrainians. And a number of crimes based on hatred. According to the Ombudsman, the number of cases of aggression against Ukrainians has increased by a factor of 6. This has happened in Gdańsk, in Białystok, in Warsaw, and the main reason for such attacks is when people are heard speaking Russian. Where there are in Hajnówka, where there are many Russians, there's a dense population. There is an annual march of Polish nationalists with the slogan "Death to enemies of the nation," and this is to strike fear in the hearts of the Ukrainians and others who live there. So I would call on this international organization and the NGOs present here to pay attention to this problem, to work with the Polish authorities in order that the rights of ethnic Russians who are attracted to Poland because the labor market needs them, that their rights be fully respected. Thank you.
Thank you. I now call on the National Forum Ossetia Accuses, followed by the United Kingdom. Oh, I'm sorry, I skipped one here. I now call on Sandy Zan, followed by the National Forum Ossetia Accuses.
Distinguished colleagues, Madam Moderator, good morning. For 30 years now, South Ossetians have been the victims of crime based on their ethnicity and their religion. These crimes run roughshod over the rights and freedoms of ethnic Ossetians. They're motivated by hate. This hate is on the rise. Hate against our people, the foundations of our livelihoods, our worldview, and our identity. These crimes are committed against our language, our way of life, our holy sites, and the very future of my ethnic group. On many occasions, we have reported facts of killings of ethnic Ossetians, illegal arrests, people being stripped of the opportunity to speak with their loved ones, and with Ossetian ombudsmen. Some people have been kidnapped, taken out of South Ossetia. Some have been unable to access their holy sites and their houses in Georgia. Inhuman and immoral sacrilege was committed by the Georgians in the Ossetian village of Khahet. In 1991, this village was destroyed and buried underground as a result of a very big earthquake. 57 people lost their lives, as we're few in number, as South Ossetians, because of all the aggression, all of the wars we have fallen victim to. 57 people is a lot for us. Currently, this area is being dug up and flattened by the Georgians. They're building a police checkpoint. And in fact, the builders working on this at this construction site have told us that very often they dig up human remains, bones, at this site. Some have decided not to work there any longer. Distinguished colleagues, we call on the international community, everyone at this meeting, to pay particular attention to these crimes being committed against our people by the Georgian state. I also see a catastrophe on the South Ossetia-Georgian border near the village of Tsnelis. The Georgians are sending military units there in violation of the Medvedev-Sarkozy agreement. They're building fortifications. They're building up for a military confrontation. We call on colleagues to document all of this and to pay particular attention so that we do not allow any more bloodshed to occur. Thank you.
Thank you. I now pass the floor to National Forum Ossetia Accuses, followed by the United Kingdom.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you, moderator. The residents of the Republic of South Ossetia, unfortunately, know the term crimes based on hatred in deeds and not just in words. In the course of the 20th century, Ossetians have been subject to genocide by Georgians on a number of occasions. The first time 100 years ago, when Georgian Mensheviks shot more than 5,000 Ossetian children, women, and elderly, simply because of their ethnic origin. And about 15,000 died when trying to flee across snowbanks. South Ossetia has called on in the international organizations to pay attention to these problems. Unfortunately, there has been no appropriate assessment and condemnation of this. And what did we get? We got the War of Georgia against South Ossetia in the years 1989-1992, when Georgian armed forces and bandit groups engaged in ethnic cleansing. More than 100,000 Ossetians fled Georgia, fleeing this ethnic cleansing. All in all, 117 Ossetian villages were burned down or destroyed. And once again, South Ossetia turned to international organizations and to the participating states of the UN and the OSCE, but there was no reaction. There was a consent by silence or even active participation by the USA and Western European states in Georgian aggression against the Republic of South Ossetia in 2008. Today, the Georgian side is bringing in more armed forces along the state boundary between South Ossetia and Georgia. In 2008, there was a building of military fortifications along the perimeter of the territory of South Ossetia. And the observers of the OSCE remain silent about these military preparations of Georgia. Unfortunately, there's no reaction either from the EU observation mission that is in Georgia. Georgian police officers have built a station on the territory of the Republic of South Ossetia. This is a violation of the state boundary between South Ossetia and Georgia. And we're talking about a police station that is just 150 meters from the Ossetian village of Tsnelis, and the closest Georgian village is 4 kilometers away. We would like to recommend that all of these stations be taken away, that there be a security buffer zone between the two states with no armed forces located there. And we also call upon Georgia to accept the proposal of the Ossetian side to resolve the issue of demarcation of the state boundary between the Republic of South Ossetia and Georgia. Thank you for your attention. The full text will be submitted to the Secretariat.
In the United Kingdom, followed by the Charitable, Cultural, and Educational Fund, Luis.
Thank you, Madam Moderator, and sorry, is this making a really funny noise? Thank you. I fully align with the statement delivered on behalf of the EU, and we have some short national comments. In April this year, the UK marked the first Stephen Lawrence Memorial Day. Stephen Lawrence was 18 when he was murdered in an unprovoked racist attack in London in 1993. His family worked tirelessly to campaign for justice for Stephen and were instrumental in the government's decision to launch an inquiry into the response to Stephen's murder. 20 years ago this February, the report of that inquiry, the Macpherson Inquiry, was published. This is widely recognised as a watershed moment in our journey to fully comprehend and to address racism, discrimination and hate crime in the UK. Since then, we have developed one of the world's most robust responses to hate crime, including our leadership in recognising the needs of victims of hate crime. We put victims at the heart of our hate crime definition, which is based on the perception of the victim or any other person as being a crime motivated by prejudice or hate. In the UK, we treat all hate crimes with equal seriousness. We are clear that no one should be targeted for hatred because of their race, religion, sexual orientation, disability, or transgender identity. We know that hate crimes can cause lasting physical and emotional damage. They can evoke despair, anger, and anxiety in victims and spread fear and mistrust in communities, thus weakening the glue that binds our society together. They strike at the heart of our democracy by undermining the fundamental rights of equality and non-discrimination. The government's Hate Crime Action Plan, which we refreshed in 2018, sets out our approach to combating hate crime. We focus on 5 key areas: preventing hate crime, increasing reporting, supporting victims, responding in communities, and building our understanding. We also have a strong legal framework in place with criminal penalties for offences such as incitement to racial hatred or for racially or religiously aggravated assault and criminal damage. As part of the Hate Crime Action Plan, we have asked the Law Commission to undertake a review of our hate crime legislation to ensure it works as effectively as possible. We welcome the important role that civil society and the voluntary sector organisations play, including through the use of third-party reporting services for victims. The UK is fully committed to engaging with all actors to help build a more inclusive, tolerant and cohesive society, and to ensure that we live up to our OSCE commitments to combat all forms of discrimination. And as I have 20 seconds left, quick recommendations. Just a recommendation for the value of independent inquiry and voluntary review to really ensure continual improvement and strengthening of your legislative framework and your national response, and the importance of the victim-centred approach and that partnership with civil society to provide a safe avenue for reporting of crimes. Thank you.
Thank you, and the recommendations are very well appreciated. I now call on Charitable Cultural and Educational Fund Luis, followed by the Holy See.
Thank you, Madam Moderator. The nationalist coup d'etat in Kiev in 2014, the civil war waged by the Ukrainian government against its own citizens in the east of Ukraine, discrimination against the Russian language.
And this discrimination against the Russian language and all of these other acts show that the Crimeans were quite right to return to Russia. However, after this democratic and constitutional decision of Crimeans through a referendum, the result were sanctions, including closing down electrical transmissions through the North Crimean Channel, where some 80% of fresh water also was delivered. Now, unfortunately, the authorities of the countries of NATO and the EU are closing their eyes, and they are spreading fake news about the events in Crimea in 2014. However, civil society leaders and politicians who visit our republic have seen that on the peninsula there is a real policy of development, reconstruction of the social and economic infrastructure. There is inter-ethnic peace, equal rights, and respect for all national languages. Three of them, Russian, Ukrainian, and Crimean Tatar, are official state languages. Every ethnic group has the right to set up its own national cultural autonomy. This is enshrined in law at the federal and republic levels, and this very good status means that these national communities can receive financial assistance for cultural and educational programs. Ukrainian nationalism is, in fact, a policy of hatred vis-a-vis these individuals. We have seen several examples of this in various parts of the region. But this hatred against all Crimeans, because of their democratic choice to join Russia, we call on the OSCE objectively to assess the legality of these draconian measures taken against the Crimean population. And we invite officials of the OSCE to visit the Republic of Crimea so that you can become convinced that there is a peaceful and harmonious development of Crimea within its historic home of Russia, and also to see that the Crimean people have taken the right choice. Thank you.
Institute for European and American Studies.
Thank you, Madam Moderator. It is well known that there is no universal definition of the notion of hate crime, and in particular no agreement on which characteristics of persons should be protected by specific legislation and policies. In its hate crime reporting, the ODIHR covers hate crimes motivated by different biases, despite the lacking official mandate recognized by the ODIHR itself to include certain categories as a bias ground. However, the participating states consciously and correctly agreed by consensus to limit the OSCE's specific interest in the area of tolerance and non-discrimination to those phenomena that could threaten the security and stability of the region. The reason for this circumscribed scope of the OSCE's interest was not a desire to ignore certain groups, but rather to reflect the organization's nature as a security organization. With regard to the relevant national legislations, the participating states committed themselves to enact wherever appropriate specific tailored legislations to combat hate crimes, and it was recently observed that most states have adequate legal frameworks for addressing hate crimes, but these criminal law provisions are often underused or unused. In particular, race, ethnicity, nationality, or similar characteristics are commonly understood as being characterized that should be protected under hate crime laws. But otherwise, there is a divergence of opinion among states and policymakers on other protected characteristics. In this regard, it may be noted that hate crime statutes sometimes arise under pressure from lobbying on part of particular interest groups. As Pope Francis pointed out, over the years, particularly in the wake of the social upheaval of the 1960s, the interpretation of some rights has progressively changed with the inclusion of a number of new rights that not infrequently conflict with one another. Therefore, the Holy See remains confident that the OSCE, in accordance with its nature as a security organization, while condemning all hate crimes and acts of violent intolerance and unjust discrimination, will develop a specific response to those phenomena that can undermine the peace and stability of the Euro-Atlantic and the Eurasian region. Our delegation continues to stress that the activities of the ODIHR should be based on existing commitments, refraining from affirmations or proposals regarding hate crime laws that are not based on OSCE's commitments or international law. The full text of this intervention will be circulated. Thank you, Madam Moderator.
Thank you. I now call on the Research Institute for European and America Studies, followed by Sarah Tanan.
Dear ladies and gentlemen, I seize the opportunity of being heard to refer to the problem of hate crime as a result of the instrumentalization of the refugee issue from different actors of the political spectrum and society. We see over and over again confirmed the theory of the rising popularity of extremism there where the mainstream conventional politics fails. The recent financial and debt crisis in Greece confirms the above-mentioned development, leaving as imprint the presence of radical extreme discourse at the central political scene that is the element that leads them to paths of acceptance, popularity, and adds to their high electoral results. They refer to real facts, problem, issues that impacts the daily lives of citizens. Whatever may their background be or their cause, good or bad, we don't have the right to treat this issue as anything less. This concerns the seriousness of the matter and the sense of the emergency regarding the manner to which we should act. People live now, this is our present, forming our future, our children's future, and nonetheless the lives of the innocent people aching to survive. This is not something that never should left behind. We are talking about people living a war zone. This is the problem we are facing, and this is the spirit with which we should face it, with determinacy, braveness, and solidarity. The till now trajectory in the EU has showed a humanitarian dimension and will also to contribute to this drama in the best possible way. But within the course of the events, there are being created some dysfunctional issues, mainly concerning the way we face this challenge as a whole, as a European Union. The sacrality of a human life leads the way to the path we should follow, and this is no other than a single viable and working solution for everybody. We are called to answer to xenophobia, to racism, to fear, to hate crimes with determination, with a European plan that is properly organized and executed. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you. I now call on Sarah Tanan, followed by the European Center for Democracy Development.
Thank you, Madam Moderator. My name is Sarah Tanan. I'm from Italy, and I'm a human rights activist. Dear guests, I have some questions for you. Can you imagine how it feels like being punched and kicked by a random person just because you're a Muslim woman wearing the headscarf? Can you imagine how it feels like being told that your skin color looks like shit by your classmates and your teacher not doing anything about it? Can you imagine how it feels like? Maybe yes. Do you actually know how it feels like? Probably no if you have never experienced it. Let me tell you how it feels like. It sucks. Honestly, it sucks. Therefore, I demand from the Italian representatives here to urge the Italian government to firstly redefine the existing law on hate crime by including a more specific set of biases and clearly distinguish them based on their legal implications in order to easily recognize the perpetrators and persecute them accordingly. Secondly, to stick to the commitment made in 2016 to create a database on hate crime incidents as recommended by the European Commission against Racism and Intolerance. Thirdly, to prioritize the adoption of a clear and effective law addressing hate speech online and offline. Finally, and this is a recommendation for all of you, in order for these policies to be representative of the people they defend, these same people must have a seat at the decision-making table. And to be clear, not because they are invited, but because they belong there. I belong here. Thank you.
Thank you. I now call on the European Center for Democracy Development, followed by Unconstrained Analytics Incorporated.
Спасибо большое.
Thank you very much, Madam Moderator. Unfortunately, we are compelled to note that hate crime in the OSCE is on the rise, in all participating states, in fact. We're particularly concerned about the fact that the share of anti-Semitic crimes is growing, as well as other crimes targeting specific ethnic groups. Sometimes governments combat these crimes, but some governments have in fact condoned these crimes. This can be done in a number of ways. First of all, by preventing investigations of these crimes, or it can also be done by indirectly adopting laws promoting these kinds of crimes. In fact, in the Ukraine, we have had a lot of hate crimes committed, and many of them have not been investigated, nor have any judgments been handed down. Turning now to lawmaking. There's a 2015 law in the Ukraine on those who fought for Ukraine in the 20th century. They, in fact, these laws mean that the liability of those who committed crimes against the Jews are in a way glorified. Thus, Ukraine is indirectly condoning these crimes being committed. It comes as no surprise, then, that anti-Semitic vandalism is something that's very prominent in the Ukraine. It tops a number of rankings. This is, in fact, logical if we see that there's a rise of anti-Semitic sentiment. It's not only Bandera, who recently had a monument erected in his honor. There are other monuments to people like Yaroslav Sprichko and many others who themselves killed Jews. Very often, these monuments are being erected on the very spot where many Jews lost their lives. So it seems that those who glorify these acts are going to be fine, whereas those who fight against this glorification, they will have charges brought against them. Also, the use of various languages in Ukraine. You risk being put behind bars for 10 years if you promote multilingualism. There is, in fact, a new language law which was adopted recently. If you read that law, that's the conclusion you draw, that you will have charges brought against you. So this is what prompts the rise in hate crime. We call for the Venice Commission to review the new legislation on languages and also the law on those who committed to the independence of Ukraine in the 20th century, so that the Venice Commission can pay particular attention to these pieces of legislation, because these are the laws that are contributing to the rise in hate crime in Ukraine.
Is Unconstrained Analytics Incorporated, followed by René Cassin.
Thank you, Madam Moderator, ladies and gentlemen. Hate crimes needs a definition. Let me explain. At a formal OSCE side event in Warsaw in 2013, we got the drafters of the Islamophobia narrative to acknowledge that the term has no central definition. In 2017, on the 20th anniversary of Runnymede Islamophobia, A Challenge for Us All, Runnymede put out Islamophobia, Still a Challenge for Us All, where, yet again, it acknowledged that the Islamophobia still does not have an agreed published definition. Before offering its own definition, Islamophobia is anti-Muslim racism, which happens to be the same definition the Organization of Islamic Cooperation promulgated in 2005 when declaring it a new form of racism. In September 2019, just a couple weeks ago, the Tony Blair Institute for Global Change issued Designating Hate, New Policy Responses to Stop Hate Crimes, that likewise designated Islamophobia a form of racism while also affirming that the term lacks a definition, all the while seeking its aggressive criminalization. To no one's surprise, the Tony Blair report also acknowledged that hate crimes has no definition. Excuse me. At a May 2015 OSCE event in Vienna, at an official forum, we got an OSCE panel to admit that saying something known to be true can constitute hate speech, thus criminalizing the truth. As of May 2019, the UN General Secretary Antonio Guterres, in a speech on the United Nations Strategy and Plan of Action on Hate Speech, called for stepped-up action to prosecute hate speech even as UN officially acknowledged that the term lacks definition. It is not a coincidence that both Islamophobia and hate crimes converge on repurposed neo-Marxist notions of racism to be arbitrated by unelected diplomats in international forums where the people are cut off from any meaningful participation. Masked and facially neutral language, the energy behind prosecuting these known to lack definition attack narratives is chilling. Of course, as we are constantly reminded, we all know what it is. And we do. It is the granting to the state the arbitrary authority to prosecute its citizens for any reason or no reason at all. We will have those definitions after it's too late to stop the process. When that happens, we will have completed the transition from citizens to subjects. Just consider the aphorism built around slogans calling for the suppression of those who seek to divide us. Stripped of their saccharine narratives, these phrases, in the guise of prosecuting hate speech and Islamophobia, would give the state the arbitrary power to criminalize dissent of its citizens. This is the rhetoric of totalitarianism. It is the abuse of language leading to the abuse of power. In forums like this, we are left to ponder whether our delegates are cynical, or both.
Thank you. I now pass the floor to Renee Cassin, followed by Youth ID.
Thank you to ODIHR for this opportunity. I would like to recommend that we hold politicians to account for hateful and discriminatory language. Politicians and prospective candidates must uphold human rights values in the words they use. States should develop codes of conduct with effective mechanisms to ensure this. As committed to in the Ministerial Council Decision 13.06 in Brussels, states must also address hate speech in public discourse to promote mutual respect. Yet, in August 2018, the now Prime Minister of the UK, Boris Johnson, made an extremely Islamophobic comment about Muslim women. According to Tell Mama, the national charity which provides a reporting mechanism for cases of Islamophobia, his comment resulted in a significant spike in anti-Muslim incidents. Moreover, national and local politicians routinely demonize and criminalize Roma, Sinti, and traveller communities, which increases social exclusion and hate crime. This was most evident in the racist murder of a boy called Johnny Delaney, killed for being a traveller in 2003. Words matter. They legitimise hostility and reinforce prejudice, which can lead to violence. We must cut it out. Young people do not accept racist or prejudicial speech, nor will they vote for it. I also just want to highlight that while I appreciate what the United Kingdom delegation said, in UK law, all victims of hate crime are not treated the same. And if there is a hate crime perpetrated to someone on the basis of gender identity, sexual orientation, or disability, they are not treated in the same way as race or religious hate crimes. And there is a call for parity and clarity on this. I want to end with the words of Jo Cox, the British female politician murdered by a neo-Nazi in 2016. We have more in common than that which divides us. Politicians need to remember this. Thank you.
Thank you. I now call on Youth ID, followed by CJ Foundation.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. My statement will be in French. If you could use your headphones, please. En tant que jeune,
As a young person, I want to be hopeful about the future. Therefore, I want to focus on solutions rather than dwelling on problems. And in fact, you know what part of the solution is. The way to fight hate crime. International mobility programs, in other words, exchanges. My recommendation for all delegates in the OSCE are as following. This is especially addressed to the French delegation. We really need to invest more money, more resources in international mobility programs so that every single young person can meet and get acquainted with another culture. We also need to support NGOs working on the ground, especially those working with disadvantaged young people, especially those who have been victims of hate crime or who are susceptible to committing hate crime in the future. I created Youth ID, an NGO, 3 years ago, to turn young people into agents of change. Far too often, we see young people as a group to be protected, but actually, we are part of the solution. We work with various mobility programs, such as Erasmus Plus, and many countries in the room today are part of that initiative. This brings together 50 young people from 9 countries for a week in one of the member states. These young people then work on topical issues such as combating violence, preventing radicalization, and the like. There are also specific bilateral programs such as OFAG or the OFQJ. For instance, France and Germany have been very active in this initiative. There have been many exchanges. Canada has also been involved, and as part of these initiatives, we should focus more on preventing hate crime. These programs directly contribute to preventing hate crime and combating discrimination. We work with victims of hate crime through these programs. These young people gain self-confidence. They learn how to defend themselves and learn what to do in case they once again victimized. These programs equip young people with concrete tools. In order to help those organizations out there in the field like my own, we need more financial support, we need logistical support, especially if we want to make headway. As resources are scarce, we need to channel earmarked financial resources to programs working with young people, especially disadvantaged young people and young people who have been victims of hate crime.
the best way to fight against all kinds of discrimination and prevent hate crime is giving the opportunity to every new generation to have in a practical way mobility programs. Thank you very much.
Thank you. I now call on CJ Foundation, followed by the European Muslim Initiatives for Social Cohesion, EMISCO.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. I'm Dave Petty, CJ Foundation. The session is on hate crimes, which is linked to hate speech. In fact, in many jurisdictions, the speech itself is the hate crime. The key ingredient is the extension of rights to include the right not to be insulted and not to have one's feelings hurt. This supposedly is to make society more harmonious. Proponents say, with free speech, handicapped people might be insulted. There may be those who plot to insult the handicapped, but I think a more likely scenario is the bait and switch. Application of the law from the handicapped to government officials will be swift. These laws will be a convenient tool to suppress opposition. Everyone knows individuals and groups who are injustice collectors. They see slights and insults at every turn. To give such persons or groups the force of law is madness. Rather than making society more harmonious, it's transforming society into a litigious nightmare. In the name of common sense, the CJ Foundation recommends that these extension of the rights be rolled back by the OSCE. They are arbitrary and unworkable. The solution for insult and hurt feelings is dialogue, apology, and forgiveness, not the courts. And this says nothing about the necessity to protect our precious traditions of free speech. Thank you, Madam Chairman.
Thank you. I now call on the European Muslim Initiative for Social Cohesion, followed by the Azerbaijan Institute for Democracy and Human Rights.
Merci.
Thank you, Madam Moderator. In international law, the responsibility for combating crimes motivated by hatred rests mainly with states. This is affirmed in the documentation of ODIHR. Today, one of the major ways in which relations within our societies are being polluted is the ability for terrorist organizations to use hatred. Terrorist attacks are hate crimes by definition, and that is why we would like to draw attention to the differences that exist in the terroristic nature of certain organizations within participating states. And this, unfortunately, has the result of strengthening those organizations that commit their crimes against humanity. There is collateral damage caused in recent years by combating terrorism. The inhuman acts committed by Al-Qaeda or Daesh have resulted in hateful acts against Muslim communities that are peaceful and that have in fact condemned these organizations. Let us not forget that these attacks also killed Muslims. I would like to draw your attention to two examples that have affected Muslim communities and in particular Turkish communities in Europe. The Secretary General of the United Nations, in his annual report on children in armed conflict, reported this year on crimes committed by the PKK against children. It is stated in that report that many children have been taken away from their families to serve terrorism, and that is on the increase. Crise Internationale, Human Rights Watch, and Amnesty International have confirmed this. Despite these warnings, the PKK continues to recruit children. The protest initiated by Madame Hasir Akar in Turkey ended up with the return of her son a few weeks ago, and that protest brought together dozens of families, and we observe with consternation that capitals to the west of Vienna are not interested in these mothers. This deafening silence is not surprising because the PKK, which is a hate-mongering organization by nature, marches every year in complete impunity in Western capitals in the name of human rights. Imagine that associations might be able to march in Europe to call for the release of the Brussels or Bataclan terrorists. This makes combating terrorism ineffective. Now, since the failed coup d'etat, organizations associated with the Gulenist terrorist group have found a tribune in Western capitals, and they continue to be present here as well. And I think that this is no longer acceptable. We must move away from this kind of double standard. Let us agree on the terrorist nature of the PKK and of the Gulenist group. That is a danger for all of us in Europe. The full text of my statement will be distributed. Thank you.
On the Azerbaijan Institute for Democracy and Human Rights, followed by the World Uyghur National Assembly.
Thank you, Madam Chair, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Ahmar Shadov. I represent Azerbaijan Institute for Democracy and Human Rights, and today's topic is very relevant because most of crimes and wars in the world are based on the hatred and attacks to mosques and killing innocent people are one of these crimes. Today, there are a lot of political parties in Europe that support this hate speech, and there are also persons and groups that support these hate crimes. We call them like radicalists and terrorists. Today I want to talk about another part that you will be surprised. I want to show you this photo. This is the monument that erected in Yerevan in Armenia.
The point of order from Armenia.
Thank you, Madam Moderator. It is not allowed to show photos here, and I would like you to kindly ask you, the speaker, to respect the rules. This is a procedural rule. Thank you.
Why not allowed? I don't understand. I am talking about this fact. This is the monument that erected in Yerevan, Armenia. And
Madam Moderator.
I recognize the point of order, and I'm consulting with the director.
But he is continuing.
Yes, well, I had not given him back the floor, so, sir,
I want to show the...
No, sir, we cannot show any photos of individuals.
Okay. This is the monument that erected in Yerevan, Armenia, to one of the so-called national leaders of Armenian nation, Tehrurian, that used to fight against Turkey. Maybe from the Armenian point of view, this monument is normal, but what is the unnormal? That's why I tried to show this monument, that Armenian government erected this statue and put the Turkish military general Talat Pasha's head under the feet of this Tehurian. And by this way, Armenian government shows the brutality and teach the Armenian children how to fight against the Turkey, the Turkish people, Turkish nation, and that this is the fact of how to say hate crime. And unfortunately, this is not only the fact. There is also erected the monument to Garagin Nijde in Yerevan, Armenia. Who is Garagin Nijde? Maybe everyone knows here. Garagin Nijde fought against all humanity during the Second World War from the side of Nazi Germany. And at the end, I want to show this book. Maybe you will allow me to show this book. It's called the Republic of Artsakh, so-called Artsakh Republic, and Armenian representatives are distributing this book in ordinary meetings. I just want to remind that there is no country like Republic of Armenia, and no country sitting here recognized. Even the Armenia officially didn't recognize the Republic of Armenia, and I ask and urge ODIHR Secretariat not to allow to distribute these provocative books here. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you. I now pass the floor to the World Uyghur National Assembly, followed by the Sova Center for Information and Analysis.
Dear moderator, as a representative of WUNA, I would like to draw attention to the situation that my people are currently living around the world, not having opportunity to obtain official refugee status because 5 countries want to get along with the China's government. We call on countries that can make things happen in favor of better respect for fundamental rights and a greater cooperation in order to guarantee a minimum framework of respect for human rights. Kazakhstan, which is one of the OSCE participating countries, because of its geographical proximity to the region, is one of those countries. There are thousands of Kazakh families who fled to Kazakhstan from the Uyghur region in China, which are currently fragmented. At least one of the members of these families have relatives in these so-called education camps that are not opened for the visit of international witnesses. Kazakhstan has a possibility to collect better information from these families in order to make clear this unacceptable situation. Despite hundreds of thousands of our fellow refugees in Kazakhstan in recent years, the existence of these camps is still not recognized by the Kazakh authorities. The OSCE Ministerial Council should ask Kazakhstan to make its own investigation for an issue which is directly concerning its close neighborhood. China does not allow students from the Uyghur region who wish to travel to Kazakhstan for higher education. It's the responsibility of Kazakhstan to ask why. The Kazakh government received the citizenship application of various people from the Uyghur region in China, but has some difficulties in dealing with this application. We would like to call Kazakh authorities to improve this process in order to prevent the creation of massive vulnerable groups. Thank you very much.
Thank you. I now pass the floor to the Sova Center for Information and Analysis, followed by the Yazidi Center for Human Rights.
Thank you. My speech will be in Russian. So, моя страна.
My country, the Russian Federation, bunches together hate crime and hate speech, and it's all considered to be part of extremism. Currently, there is legislation on restricting the freedom of expression. The freedom of expression is used as grounds to justify some of these crimes, and it's deemed that the fight against xenophobic violence has been deemed effective. However, it must be said that we have rather effectively fought against racist violence, but ultra-right radicalism has adapted to these new conditions. It's become more nimble. However, the problem has not gone away. Right-wing groups who used to focus on ethnic minorities are now directing their energies towards the homeless and the LGBT community. The situation is exacerbated by the fact that the level of intolerance amongst ordinary Russians vis-à-vis these groups is unbelievably high. Most of these attacks, even killings, do not elicit a strong response from society, and often law enforcement authorities do not classify these crimes as hate crimes. Well, you get the impression that in most of these cases where the bona fide motives were teased out, this only happened because anti-extremist civil society organizations did an excellent job, not because the law enforcement officers did. However, this is not enough. We need to register suspicions about the motivations of these criminals at the earlier stages. Another issue is that the nationalists often attack those considered to be the fifth column or traitors of the motherland. We believe that we need to harness the experience we've accumulated in Russia in combating these groups for the benefit of the OSCE. And this stems a whole gamut of practices. For instance, pinpointing the funding that these groups obtain, how they're coordinated, and so on. For instance, we could organize an expert seminar on this topic, bringing together both issues the human dimension and the issue of security. Our recommendations are as follows. We believe that it's absolutely vital that we need to change the system of reporting. So whenever there are suspicions that the motive of hate was involved, this needs to be registered at the earliest possible stage. This will make the whole process more effective, especially if specialized police units are involved. However, ordinary police also need to pay attention to these hate motives. Thank you.
Thank you. I now call on the Yazidi Center for Human Rights, followed by the Mejlis of Crimean Tatar People.
Madam Moderator, dear colleagues, it should be mentioned that hate speech and hate crimes start with ignorance and unmeaningful participation of a group in society. When we talk about national minority, we should take into account that meaningful participation of national minorities should be guaranteed in order to prevent marginalization of minorities based on their religion, identity, or just because they are different than the others. In Armenia, participation of national minorities in political life is symbolic. According to Electoral Code of Armenia, minority representative in the parliament is appointed by the ruling party and is not being elected by minority group representatives, which is just making an impression that minorities participate in political life in the country. But in reality, the minority group has no influence on the elections of parliamentarian, which represents their group. It is disappointing that till now national minorities doesn't participate in the decision-making process where decisions are being made about them, especially when it is about designing the education policy for them. There are no programs for national minorities which will teach them their rights and help to defend them. Hate speeches against the Yazidis continue, and phrases like dirty Yazidi, Yazidi color, Yazidi behavior, aiming to offend the opponent become already normal in the society. Hate speeches and hate crimes often happen in the regions when the head of municipal bodies, head of regions based on discrimination and hate speech violate the fundamental rights of Yazidi people. Unfortunately, the hate speech exists even among the teachers who discriminate Yazidi pupils trying to humiliate them. In order to solve these issues, we recommend to organize minority rights training for minority organizations, organize trainings for public servants, teachers about minority rights, guarantee the rights of fair trial when national minorities are being discriminated. Thank you.
Thank you. I now call on the Mejlis of Crimean Tatar People, followed by the Hungarian Muslim Defense League. And if the speaker is not here, then I will then call. Okay. Sir, your time has begun.
Madam Moderator, I had another meeting, and I'm sorry I came in just a bit late. Ladies and gentlemen, in my statement, I would like to note or share a thought that was stressed by the representative of the European Union when she referred to the phenomenon of racist hatred being spread on the internet. Hatred almost always results in direct violence and even in people losing their lives, and especially when there is a policy of hatred being vehiculated by a state. It becomes state policy. And in particular, I'd like to note that the military occupation of parts of Ukraine with the occupation of Crimea back in 2014 are that these are forms of aggression that has resulted in violence, in incitement to hatred, and in many people losing their lives. From the beginning of the Russian occupation of Crimea, at least 35,000 people have left the peninsula. And within the peninsula, some 500,000 Russian citizens have moved in. So there is an expulsion of the indigenous population of Crimea to be replaced by the population of the occupying force. In 2016, the Mejlis of the Crimean Tatar peoples was prohibited to meet. It was labeled a terrorist organization, and this is an attack on a long-standing public institution. 45 Ukrainian citizens, most of them Crimean Tatars, have been subject to forced disappearance. As many of them were found subsequently dead. Their corpses were found. There is no trace of the others. And this is another consequence of the military occupation of Crimea by Russia. And as a last point, I would like to note, but my time is up. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Moderator. Let me start by expressing my gratitude for being here. It's my first time here, and my NGO is also the first in Hungary which specifically focuses on protecting the rights of Muslims in Hungary. The Hungarian Muslim community has many grievances in Hungary. I'd like to focus on 3 areas today: hate crimes and discrimination, the question of Islamic funerals, and hate speech. I believe that to address the aforementioned issues, we need to start a dialogue. Victims of hate crime and discrimination are often unwilling to report because they are afraid that they will be mistreated or ignored, as it often happens. So trust should be built and re-established in the institutions, and for that, officers and experts should be trained to better handle these cases and the victims. Statistical methods should be improved as well, because, for example, in 2017 there was only 1 case registered as a hate crime against a Muslim person, but we are aware of many more cases. For example, in 2017 as well, my mosque was attacked by the Identity Generation movement. They trespassed and put a huge billboard on the building which read, "Islamization kills, support the border fence." The police said it's not a crime, but it's certainly against the law, so steps should have been taken. Let's not forget that the Identity Generation is linked to the New Zealand terrorist. I would like to thank the Hungarian government, however, that they provided police help after the New Zealand attack, but it was just a one-time offers, so now my mosque is hiring security guards. I understand that the police can be there all the time, but at least an atmosphere could be created where I don't have to be afraid to go to the mosque or that I won't have a job because of my background. Christian and Jewish communities can have graveyards, but it would be of tremendous assistance if the government helped us have our own cemetery. And finally, we are deeply concerned that many politicians incite fear and hatred against Muslims, and this can easily spread onto other minorities. For example, a few weeks ago, a Roma journalist was attacked because he was thought to be an Arab immigrant. Let me quote from the Bible. You reap what you sow, end quote. So if you sow fear and hatred, you will reap fear and hatred. So I implore the Christian democratic government to condemn those who spread hatred and instead please spread the message of tolerance and love, just like my community is standing for peace and peaceful coexistence. Thank you.
Thank you. I now call on Pax Europa, followed by Tajikistan.
Thank you, Madam Moderator. Ladies and gentlemen, the introduction of the terms hate crime and hate speech can still be considered more than problematic. Firstly, the term hate has no legal definition, and rightly so, as it describes a feeling, a state of mind. Although feelings must never be criminalized, all indicators point in the direction that they are. Secondly, ladies and gentlemen, a crime is a crime, and no qualification, be it hate crime or love crime or any other emotion, can change this. As a matter of fact, the very concept of hate crime arises out of the notion of hate speech, which itself seeks the overt criminalization of expression, thereby turning free expression on its head with a goal of criminalizing thought based on how other people feel, where the feeling can be anything or nothing at all. Pax Europa recommends that OSCE participating states reconsider their commitment to fundamentally anti-democratic, purely statist legal standards that exist to suppress the freedoms of the people they presume to represent in this very forum. Thank you very much.
I now call on the government of Tajikistan, followed by Canada.
Madam Moderator, dear participants, Republic of Tajikistan adheres to all international and regional initiatives on combating hate crime. In accordance with the Article 189 of the Criminal Code of Tajikistan, action aims to inciting national, racial, local or religious hatred, humiliation of national dignity, as well as propaganda of exclusivity of citizens on the basis of their attitude to religion, national, racial or local affiliation, if these actions committed publicly or using the media considered as a crime. Turning to the recommendation, we deeply regret that the OSCE provides a platform for organizations which ideologies are based on the principles of religious intolerance and propaganda of violence. Here, I would like to refer to the book Beyond Politics by the founder of spiritual father of the Islamic Renaissance Party banned in Tajikistan, Saeed Abdullah Nouri, in which he openly promotes violence and calls for the killing of Tajik citizens even if he considers herself as a Muslim but do not share their political views. On page 190, the author called Tajikistan as a territory of infidels, Dar al-Kufr, and territory of war, Dar al-Harb, using terminology and rhetorics of the jihadis similar to ISIS. On page 198, the author says, those who today live in the territory of enemy, even if he considers himself as a Muslim but does not join us, are infidel, and they should be treated as infidels. Their property is allowed to be appropriated, their blood to shed, and their marriage are considered invalid. This is just two examples, but there are dozens. During its activity in the country, the party had officially published literature and other materials encouraging religious intolerance and hatred towards its opponents. Today, the followers of this ideology, hiding from justice in some EU countries and re-registered themselves under other names and titles, continue to propagate the ideology of hatred using a hate speech, which can be observed on their pages on the internet and social networks. Proceeding from this, we urge the OIC and its participant states, as well as other interested parties, to pay attention to these facts and prevent the registration and participation of representatives of such groups in the official events. And we kindly ask all participants not to pretend being blind and deaf in front of fact. Thank you.
Thank you. I call on Canada, followed by the Regional Bulgarian National Cultural Autonomy of the Republic of Crimea, named after Paisa Helendarsky.
Moderator, Canada offers the following recommendations: that OSCE participating states go beyond reactively responding to hate and discrimination and to proactively foster inclusion and respect for diversity to prevent hate from building. And two, that participating states make full use of ODIHR's expertise to implement best practices on countering hate crime and promoting inclusion. Moderator, we must take a stand in Canada and around the world to denounce hate speech and the incitement of violence. Attacks on the basis of identity are an assault on the fundamental dignity and rights of every person. Hate crimes target both the integral and visible parts of a person's identity and affect individuals and their communities. Canada is a multicultural and multi-faith country. The most recent census data from 2016 shows that almost 1/4 of Canadians report being members of a visible minority, and Canada's population is expected to become even more diverse in the coming decades. We cannot be complacent in countering the threat of hate and its devastating consequences, both online and offline. The spread of online hate speech and its real-world effects are of serious concern. We have witnessed the increased targeting of Christian minorities in Easter bombings in Sri Lanka, increased attacks on Muslim communities, including in New Zealand, as well as anti-Semitic violence, as seen in the Pittsburgh synagogue mass shooting. We have seen the impacts in Canada as well, when in 2017, 6 lives were lost and many more injured during a horrific shooting at a mosque in Quebec City. The shooter translated his hateful anti-Muslim speech online into violence. We cannot afford to add any more names to this list. Canada believes that good internet governance is crucial to addressing online hate and abuse effectively and to finding balance between security and dignity. Online platforms have increasingly become a tool to incite, publish, and promote terrorism, violence, and hatred. The Christchurch attack was a harrowing reminder that we need to take a coordinated multilateral action to prevent social media and other online platforms from being used to promote and incite such hatred and violence. In May 2019, Canada's Digital Charter was enacted to build on our commitments to a safe online space. One of its fundamental principles is freedom from hate and violence and extremism, and that Canadians can expect that digital platforms will not foster or disseminate hate, violent extremism, or criminal content. The Government of Canada will continue bilateral and multilateral efforts to work with digital industry, including social media platforms, to better address violent extremism and online hate. This is an area that the OSCE should and must pursue to counter hate crimes in defense of our collective, comprehensive security. Thank you.
Thank you, and we certainly appreciate the recommendations. I now call on the Regional Bulgarian National Cultural Autonomy of Crimea, named after Paisa Helendarsky, followed by Azerbaijan.
Madam Moderator, thank you for giving me the floor. I also want to thank you for giving an opportunity to my fellow Crimeans to take part in these discussions and to myself. I must say that all of the topics we've discussed at all of the sessions are topical, important, but what really matters is the outcome. This is the 4th time I'm taking part in an OSCE meetings. And unfortunately, I cannot but conclude that we're not inching even one step closer to consensus. Our opponents have invoked myths about the aggressor state, Russia, the occupation of Crimea, harassment and discrimination in Crimea on the basis of their nationality. They are basing these allegations on distorted information emanating from Ukraine. At our meeting, many Crimeans have invited participants to come to Crimea to see for yourselves how things stand in Crimea. They've reiterated these invitations on a number of occasions. Come and see for yourselves how Crimea is faring. Russia has been accused of flouting the Helsinki Principles. However, a long time before the Crimea and Russia were reunited, a lot of the map, a great portion of the map of Europe was redrawn without any referendums. Why is no one talking about the Helsinki Agreement? About the reunification? Why did no one talk about the Helsinki Agreement when Germany was reunified, when the Czech Republic and Slovakia divorced, when the Soviet Union was shattered, resulting in 15 independent states being set up? All of this resulted in hotspots emerging, pending.
Working session is the participating states' compliance with the commitments to address hate crime and the respective role of intergovernmental organizations.
Against this backdrop, the Crimea made a choice on a democratic basis. Are these results not compelling? Is this not democracy? It is not the Russian Federation which stole Crimea from Ukraine. Crimeans themselves did not want to be part of Ukraine any longer. A country where there's Russophobia, where there's caveman nationalism, where the use of all languages aside from Ukrainian is restricted. I come from the Bulgarian national minority in the Crimea, and I solemnly declare that there's no harassment on the basis of nationality in Crimea. I call on objective assessments of the situation on the ground in the Crimea. I call on you to recognize that there is no discrimination on the basis of nationality or religion in Crimea. Furthermore, I suggest
Now call on Azerbaijan, followed by the Forum of Tajik Democratic Freethinkers.
Thank you, Madam Moderator. Azerbaijan is a secular state where Christianity, Judaism, and Islam, along with many others, have been peacefully coexisting and thrived together throughout centuries, if not millennia. To reinforce these traditions, the government of Azerbaijan conducts consistent policy empowering religious communities to grow and prosper. Government Azerbaijan allocates financial assistance on a regular basis to the religious communities of our country. Its commitment of Azerbaijan to religious freedoms that enables many new religious communities to find a fertile ground for development in Azerbaijan. In the last 10 years, the number of registered religious communities of Azerbaijan has tripled, reaching now 942, while the number of Christian communities increased fivefold. On an international stage, Azerbaijan has proven that a predominantly Muslim society with no record of hatred crime can be a trusted partner and capable host of international religious events to promote interfaith dialogue. On 14-15 November of this year, my country will be hosting the second Baku Summit of the World Religious Leaders that will bring together around hundreds of religious leaders from almost every corner of the world to discuss common challenges, enhance mutual understanding, and contribute to countering religious radicalism and violent extremism. As an international community, we have a moral obligation to ensure that religion serves the spiritual enrichment of our societies while preventing them from subordination to narrow political objectives. I would like to draw your attention to the fact that although more than 20% of historical Azerbaijani territories has been occupied by Armenia, pursuing a monocultural and aggressive policy, more than 1 million Azerbaijanis have been expelled from their lands. Thousands of our compatriots have been subjected to terrorism due to their nationality. No discrimination against Armenians living in our country has been experienced so far. Although numerous religious, cultural, and historical monuments destroyed by the Armenian armed forces in ancient Azerbaijani lands, including occupied Nagorno-Karabakh and 7 adjacent districts, 367 are historical monuments, 67 are mosques, 140 are sacred sites and temples. They dealt a great blow to the national and spiritual memory of the Azerbaijani people. But in the Armenian Apostolic Church, in the center of Baku city, protected by Azerbaijan state, only these facts are a clear proof of high tolerance and multicultural merit of the Azerbaijani state. Thank you very much.
Thank you. And before I turn the floor over to the next speaker, I'd like to remind the audience that we still have a few more slots left on the speakers list if anyone would still like to sign up. And at this point, I would also like to ask any participating states that if they would like to exercise their right of reply to speak, please see my colleagues sitting directly behind me. Thank you. I would now like to call on the Forum of Tajik Democratic Freethinkers, followed by Armenia.
Thank you, Madam Moderator. I'm with the Forum of Tajik Democratic Freethinkers. Ladies and gentlemen, crimes of hatred are spreading more and more. Unfortunately, in the contemporary world, this is often used for political purposes and is not always condemned. In Tajikistan, the authorities are a catalyst of this. They are, in fact, fomenting conflict through hatred. And there is open hostility expressed against political opponents, individuals who have different ways of thinking, and in fact there is repression of the majority Muslim majority. There have been killings occurring in places of detention, and even the president and people at in other high positions are in fact fomenting this kind of opposition and hatred. Intolerance has been publicly and openly expressed with their fake representatives from civil society at our conference. As one of the young people has said, if this is the kind of intolerance that you hear from the official ombudsman, what can you expect from the penitentiary system? There should be, of course, a political will to recognize the existence of hatred and to condemn that. But human rights defense institutions, the community within the country and outside the country must engage in dialogue. Without this, we won't be able to do away with the threat to stability and peace in the country. Appealing to the official delegation of Tajikistan, I would like to assure you that the Tajikistan opposition in exile is not at all pleased with the mistakes made by the government, which results in suffering for ordinary citizens. That we are simply ashamed of our nation for the fact that this occurs. Thank you.
Now call on Armenia, followed by Ukraine.
Dear colleagues, Tarasenko Konstantin, National...
Sorry, I'm calling on Armenia, followed by Ukraine.
Thank you, Madam Moderator. We welcome that hate crime is among specifically selected topics, the relevance of which is more than evident today. We fully subscribe to the view of the introducer that the responsibility to address hate crimes lies primarily with states, but there are cases when racist and xenophobic public discourse and open encouragement of hate crimes is led at state level. The absence of free media, restrictions against civil society, and silencing critical voices creates a conducive environment for the state propaganda to radicalize the society. We are very much concerned with the rise of the phenomenon of glorifying hate crime and hate crime perpetrators in Azerbaijan. The pardon and glorification of Ramil Safarov, who axed an Armenian officer in his sleep, is a case in point. Official glorification of hate crimes perpetrators in Azerbaijan and climate of impunity has served an encouragement for further perpetration of hate crimes, including ISIL-style executions and atrocities during Azerbaijan military aggression against Nagorno-Karabakh in April 2016. Civilians, including elderly, were brutally killed, tortured, and mutilated. The perpetrators were publicly decorated by the President of Azerbaijan, which is another manifestation of glorification of hate crimes. Madam Moderator, we call upon the OSCE institutions to fully utilize their early warning mandate through hate crime reporting and pay particular attention to those hate crimes which may seriously endanger peace and security and create environment of large-scale identity-based violence. In this regard, we recommend the ODIHR to raise the efficiency of hate crime reporting tool with a view to address hate crimes constituting security threat. And we encourage ODIHR to streamline its activities with the Council of Europe ECRI in order effectively to address hate crimes in the OSCE area, specifically in Azerbaijan. I thank you.
Thank you. I now call on Ukraine, followed by Kyrgyzstan.
Thank you. Dear colleagues, Tarasенko Konstantin, National Police of Ukraine. Вначале я хотел бы сказать, что...
At the outset, I should like to say that as someone who mostly uses the Russian language, I've never been subjected to harassment or intimidation in Ukraine. Therefore, those who accused Ukraine of persecuting some for using the Russian language, fomenting nationalism and tolerance, I don't agree with that.
State that supports the principles of equality and tolerance. Every year in Ukraine, thousands of events are organized by representatives of different nationalities and communities. Today, for example, one of the cities of Ukraine receives more than 35,000 representatives of the Jewish community to celebrate a religious holiday. The police ensure that public order is maintained properly. Dozens of events organized by representatives of the LGBT community are held annually in Ukraine. Similar events were held in Kyiv, Kharkiv, and other cities. The national police provided law enforcement during these events. Unfortunately, in Ukraine, as in other countries, there are cases of discrimination and intolerance on the part of individuals. We record hate crimes against representatives of certain nationalities, religious communities, sexual minorities. In 2018, 148 such crimes were recorded. For 8 months of 2019, 172 such crimes were recorded. Crime records against LGBT people are also kept. In 2018, 14 such crimes were recorded. For 8 months for 2019, 6 crimes. We do not see a significant increase in hate crimes, unlike the Russian Federation, where people are systematically persecuted for their religion, sexual orientation, political views, and other signs. The investigation of hate crimes is constantly monitored by the leadership of National Police of Ukraine. Police officers receive systematic continuing education in the prevention and investigation of hate crimes. Thanks to OSCE, a hate crime training manual has been developed for police officers, and in the future it will be included in the training system. Also in Ukraine there is a process of reforming the criminal law, which provides for liability for hate crimes. Summing up, I want to note that the activities of the police are based on the principles of equality regardless of nationality, race, religion, or sexual orientation. We are open for cooperation with all civil society institutions in order to combat this negative phenomenon. Thank you for attention.
Thank you. I now pass the floor to Kyrgyzstan, followed by the Regional Center of New Information Technologies.
Good afternoon. Thank you very much, Madam Moderator. Today, the basis of our efforts to combat discrimination is the Constitution. The Constitution of the Republic of Kyrgyzstan states that no one can be discriminated against on the basis of their gender, sex, language, ethnic group, whether they're disabled or not, their faith, their political or opinions or other opinions, their social status, whether they own property or not, inter alia. It must be said that the concept of hate crime is absent from the criminal code of the Kyrgyz Republic. Most crimes occur because of social and economic factors, and they are in fact colored with ethnic hues. Crimes are mostly deemed to be acts of hooliganism that's underpinned by stereotypes and misconceptions. Therefore, we do not distinguish between hate crime and other kinds of crime. We have a new criminal code. In fact, it entered into force on the 1st of January of this year. In that code, there are international norms and universally accepted principles which are set forth. It also reflects international treaties to which we are a party. Specifically, as per one of the articles, one of the principles underpinning criminal law is the principle that all are equal before the law. The main guarantees enshrined in the Constitution and also in the Criminal Code is the following. Discrimination is unacceptable. Both direct and indirect discrimination on the basis of race and or ethnicity. Preventing criminal acts in the Kyrgyz Republic is also something that's governed by the relevant legislation. The Ministry of Internal Affairs works to prevent crimes and offences being committed by working away at the root causes of these acts. They also work to prevent crimes motivated by hate. The law enforcement agencies monitor and respond to all instances of intolerance, discrimination, and hate. They investigate all allegations very thoroughly. Thank you very much.
Thank you. I now call on the Regional Center of New Information Technologies, followed by Amnesty International Ukraine.
Good afternoon, participants. Thank you for giving me this opportunity to make a statement.
To sit in the civil society seat, you're sitting in the Partners for Cooperation designated spot.
My apologies. Now, the best response to hate crimes rests with the state, but sometimes the state doesn't always want to investigate such crimes because that causes some additional problems for the forces of law and order and for civil servants. I'd like to talk about hate crimes in Kazakhstan, hate crimes of two separate categories. First, the category of people who find themselves in dire straits. Very often crimes are committed against them on the basis of hatred, but police officers and other forces of law and order don't want to investigate such crimes. And human rights defenders avoid these problems as well. And second category has to do with individuals who are in places of detention. There, hate crimes are often committed against them. And once again, such cases are only investigated if there is some evidence of torture. And if that can't be demonstrated, then this is sort of swept under the carpet. And very often the administration is interested in passing over these cases. There's a sort of a silence of consent and no investigation is carried out. And we would like more attention to be paid to these two categories. Here with my recommendations, strengthen the legislation of Kazakhstan for the combating of hate crimes in those two categories, and to increase the liability of the authorities when they do not investigate hate crimes. At the present time in Kazakhstan, the staff of penitentiary institutions can be punished only if they are shown or proved to have participated in torture. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you. I now pass the floor to Amnesty International Ukraine, followed by the Tajik Center for Human Rights.
Thank you, Madam Moderator. My name is Alena Kazanska, and I am speaking as a Roma activist of Amnesty International in Ukraine. So, what about an effective response to address hate crimes from the Ukrainian authorities? And what about the factual investigation and fair trial procedures in Ukraine when we're talking about hate crimes? I clearly see one of the possibilities to reframe the discourse of developing criminal justice system in Ukraine by taking a few steps to bring the topic, tools, and discussion about how to address hate crimes as an equal part to such popular topics as preventing corruption crimes, domestic violence, etc. And now and here, with support of the intergovernmental organizations, we are able to ensure that states will develop a criminal justice system which will include such points as standardization of criminal procedures and legal frames to identify and investigate bias-motivated criminal offenses, monitoring hate crimes in line with OSCE standards, systematical education for police and for police officers, for prosecutors, and judges. And the Ukrainian authorities must provide justice to victims of a number of hate crimes against unrepresented groups such as Roma, LGBT, etc., through an effective investigation process and fair trial proceedings that ensure that bias motive is central to the prosecution. And the last thing in my speech is about the need to ensure the safety and to build trust relations between unrepresented groups and police officers in Ukraine and each states which are represented here. And I stand against all forms of hatred because it's important. Because if I will state against one form of hatred, I will state against all forms of hatred. That's all. Thank you.
Thank you. I now call on the Tajik Center for Human Rights, followed by the CSKA Fans Against Racism, and remind participating states that if you'd like to sign up for to exercise your right of reply, to please see my colleagues sitting directly behind me. Thank you.
Vielen Dank, Herr Moderator. Ich heiße Sulaiman Orziev.
Thank you, moderator. My name is Suleiman Adiev. We all wish to underscore that the government of Tajikistan is a dictatorship. Furthermore, what we're seeing is that the government is not combating crime, not combating hate. It is, in fact, whipping up hate in Tajikistan. In Tajikistan, we've had many crimes committed, clearly motivated by hate. They've targeted specific individuals. We've also seen the flames of hate fanned on the internet. The president himself also uses hate speech so as to persecute dissenters and political opponents. For instance, the president uses terms such as enemy of the people, traitors. He uses these terms to insult his political opponents. In addition, the president was speaking on Mother's Day, and he commented the wearing of the hijab, and other headdresses. And in fact, if you like, you can go on YouTube and watch for yourselves the video of him speaking and the comments he made about the religious choices which his countrymen and women make. By doing this, he is fanning the flames of hate and sowing discord in Tajikistani society. And of course, every time we mention this, the delegation of Tajikistan then accuses us of lying and that we're tarnishing our country's reputation. Here speaking in front of the international community. However, we're of the view that we're in fact fighting for respect for our country, and we will be respected once democracy is the regime in place in Tajikistan. We don't want to have an Islamic republic. The leaders of our organization have always insisted on the fact that Tajikistan needs to become a free country, a democracy. If I may, I also will be speaking in Russian and in English. He's the enemy.
Stop line. Please stop line. Vielen Dank.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. I now move to the CSKA, Fans Against Racism, after which we will move to the rights of reply.
Dear Madam Speaker, thank you very much for a unique chance to address the issue that I'll be speaking here. Although as a human rights activist, as a person who devoted his time to anti-discrimination, I should tell that I will be leaving Warsaw in disparity, because after seeing what is happening here, I understand that we have a very long way to address the issues in the world. I was asking myself all the time, observing very tired representatives of the states, what can we do to unite people against an evil that I will be talking here about? It seems that there is an issue here which at first sight is outside the OSCE countries, but I would like to use a platform to raise once again the solidarity with people today and ask each of you, ladies and gentlemen, to question your representatives in your countries why this is happening. Madam Speaker, I'm talking about Iranian women who are today are not having a chance to enter the stadiums, and we today are sitting and observing that. I want to use this platform to raise the voice and to show solidarity with those Iranian women who cannot enter the stadium, and ask you, ladies and gentlemen, to question at least your colleagues from Iranian diplomatic missions. Why is this happening? We know that the horrible things that a state is perpetuating, it's hard to believe that in 2019 I'm sitting here and asking you and begging you to help the world community to stand against the issue of not being able for women to enter stadiums, ladies and gentlemen. All of you are FIFA members, and that's why I kindly ask you to question your football federation heads why this is taking place. We as football fans, just as human beings, are begging Mr. Gianni Infantino, the FIFA president, who has a unique power to address this issue, to use his authority to end this segregation and the hate crime against a group of people. We know that the tragedy that has recently happened in Iran, that a girl, Sahar Hadriani, set herself on fire just because she wanted to enter the stadium and got a prison sentence for that, ladies and gentlemen. It's hard for all of us to stand against a certain evil, but I believe that this is the case when all of you, just as diplomats, just as mothers or fathers of daughters, can make his personal contribution to end this case and to unite all of the 57 participating states in your attempt to question why this is still happening in the world. Thank you very much.
Thank you. We now move to the rights of reply. I will start with Uzbekistan, followed by Georgia. And each of you will have 1.5 minutes for your rights of reply.
Thank you, moderator. I'd like to take advantage of the right of reply in connection with the statement by Equal Opportunities for All. Now, unfortunately, no attention was paid to the theme of the meeting, and furthermore, a number of statements were made that have absolutely nothing to do with reality or with the constructive criticism for which the moderator has called at the beginning. I'm the president of Uzbekistan on 26 August of this year. stated that Uzbekistan is open to peace and to cooperation with the international community. We're writing a new history. Our objective is to ensure peace and comfort for the people of our nation in the future, and we hope you will contribute to that, and the President will always support you in this. As for the other statements made by the speaker, I would just like to mention that hate crime is in the criminal code. The procedural rights are ensured for victims of such crimes. They can have access to a lawyer who is present at all stages of the proceedings. Thank you.
Thank you. I will exercise the right of reply of some of the accusation of the Sandis and Ossetia accusers, even they are not sitting in the room. The territory was mentioned is the integral part of Georgia recognized by the international community. Also, the accusation voiced goes far beyond the agenda of today's meeting. I would like to echo the enormous claim that Georgia invaded South Ossetia in 2008. What we witnessed was Russia's full-scale military invasion followed by the occupation of Abkhazia and Tskhinvali region. As for the ethnic cleansing, it indeed has taken place, however, not Ossetians that it was portrayed, but Georgians. Hundreds of thousands were expelled from their homes as a result of ethnic cleansing. That has been recognized by the OSCE in Budapest, Lisbon, and Istanbul documents. Those expelled are still unable to return to their homes. I would like also to underline that there is no so-called borders, as was mentioned. It's the installation of fortifying occupation line. The Georgian government attached high priority to engagement policy and consequently to overcoming isolation of Abkhazia and Tskhinvali region stemming from the ongoing occupation by Russia. In this context, the Georgian government had intensified the engagement policies through the confidence building measures. The new peace initiative called Step a Better Future, introduced by the government of Georgia, seek to encourage contacts, movement, and interaction based on the mutual and
Madam,
interest.
I ask that you conclude your remarks. We
Yes,
need to move
just
to the next
one
speaker.
word, the dividing lines and improve the humanitarian condition of the rest in Abkhazia and Tskhinvali regions. Thank you.
Thank you. I now call on France, followed by Hungary.
Merci, Madame. Thank you, Madam Moderator. We want to exercise our right of reply, responding to the statement made by Salut et Miséricorde. France refuses the fact that religion is being instrumentalized by the forces of hate. We doggedly combat extremism and religious communitarianism, which should call for violence, for us to hate one another, and to reject our fundamental values. Having said that, France supports interreligious dialogue, which is a conduit for peace and agreement. We believe that we need to find counter-narratives to hate speech and promote knowledge of religious phenomena so as to be able to combat intolerance. Last but not least, and specifically because he is in the room, I should like to thank the representative of Youth ID for his statement and assure him that I will be sending his recommendations to my superiors. Thank you.
Thank you. I now call on Hungary, followed by the United States of America.
Thank you, Madam Moderator. Really appreciate the comments from the Hungarian Muslim Defense League. We fully subscribe to the statement that constructive dialogue has started with the relevant interlocutors. As it was mentioned, in the indicated situation, measures have been already taken, and in this context, we forward your further requirements to the competent authorities. Thank you.
Thank you. I call on the United States of America, followed by Ukraine.
Thank you, Moderator. The United States would like to reply to statements made by the Russian Federation concerning recent attacks in our country. The Russian Federation insinuated the United States policy on migration somehow caused these violent acts, even going so far as to suggest the government's connivance in these tragic events. The remarkable cynicism of these groundless assertions is belied by easily ascertainable facts. The President of the United States issued a strong call for all Americans to reject the hatred behind these crimes, urging us all to condemn racism, bigotry, and white supremacy, and declaring hate has no place in America. The authorities continue to investigate these attacks, and we are confident justice will be done. In addition, we note speakers today purporting to represent Georgia's South Ossetia region intimated that the United States had supported so-called aggression there. However, Abkhazia and South Ossetia remain integral parts of Georgia despite Russia's continuing occupation. We once again call on Russia to suspend its illegal occupation of Georgian territory and fulfill its commitments under the 2008 ceasefire agreement. For the last decade, Russia's illegal, malign behavior has undermined stability and peace in the region. Thank you, Moderator.
Thank you. I now call on Ukraine, followed by Tajikistan.
Thank you, Madam Moderator. My name is Anton Koronevich. I am permanent representative of the President of Ukraine in the Autonomous Republic of Crimea, and our delegation would like to reply to the issues raised by several civil society organizations, which may be an attempt of violation of the sovereignty and territorial integrity of Ukraine, and a repeated attempt to use the HDAM for legitimization of the illegal occupation of Ukraine's territory in the Autonomous Republic of Crimea and the city of Sevastopol. Crimea is an integral part of the territory of Ukraine. It is strictly set forth in international law, and namely in the United Nations General Assembly Resolution 68/262 Territorial Integrity in Ukraine, which strictly provides that nothing has changed in the status of Crimea after the events of the March 2014. Crimea was and still is an integral part of the territory of Ukraine. Russian Federation does not have any sovereign rights over the territory of Ukraine, and is only the occupying power which must act strictly in conformity with the rules of international humanitarian law. Russian Federation violated practically all the general principles of international law, namely the principles of territorial integrity and non-violability of borders. We do hope and expect that OSCE ODIHR will continue to be strictly guided by respective OSCE decisions that recognizes the legal status of the Autonomous Republic of Crimea as integral part of Ukraine, as reflected in Journal number 3 of the 27th meeting of Committee of Senior Officials in Prague in 1994. Thank you.
Thank you. I now call on Tajikistan, followed by Norway.
Thank you, Madam Moderator. Using my right of reply, I just would like to state that the groundless, repetitive, and sometimes very emotional allegations presented today by the representatives of the groups and movements banned by the Supreme Court of a participating state have been repeatedly answered by the delegation of Tajikistan during the last 2 weeks. Furthermore, all those allegations have been out of the topic of today's meeting, and we think that they are not worth being addressed again. On the contrary, not a thorough, but rather superficial observation of the content and publications of those groups demonstrate a clear example of inciting hatred and violence. Thank you.
Thank you. I call on Norway, followed by Canada.
Thank you. In this session, a few organizations, perhaps most notably the CJ Foundation and Pax Europa, took the floor not to offer any concrete review of human dimension commitments, but ostensibly to call for nothing but a more intolerant society, a society where hate speech proliferates. With disregard for the rights of others, in their view, it appears that intolerance and hateful speech are desirable. Norway disagrees with these statements. Intolerance and discrimination and their derivatives, such as hate speech, are obviously undesirable, and we must continue to counter it. If anything, the statements of these organizations inspire us to strengthen our efforts for an increasingly tolerant society in all its diversity. Thank you.
Thank you. I call on Canada, followed by Greece.
I'd like to use my right of reply in connection with comments made by the Russian Federation. The government of Canada has acknowledged the systemic causes of violence against Indigenous women and girls and is addressing them. Canada also recognizes that Indigenous persons are overrepresented at all stages of the criminal justice system, both as victims and offenders, which is tragic and inseparable from the historic and contemporary impacts of colonialism on Indigenous peoples. This particular historical context created disempowerment, hopelessness, cycles of violence, and desperation amongst Indigenous peoples, which exacerbated their overrepresentation in the criminal justice system. In order to achieve the transformational change required to reverse this trend, Canada has implemented comprehensive measures that include legislative reform, programming based on Indigenous culture and history, policy reforms, and a renewed emphasis on moving forward in partnership with Indigenous peoples. Canada is committed to reversing the trend of overrepresentation and improving the outcomes for Indigenous people in the criminal justice system, both as victims and offenders. We would also like to address questions about addressing anti-Muslim hate crime. Words matter when it comes to promoting inclusion and eliminating discrimination. In Canada's anti-racism strategy, we have a working definition of anti-Semitism, Islamophobia, and anti-Black racism. These working definitions enable us to have a common understanding of a word or subject. The working definition of Islamophobia is as follows: includes racism, stereotypes, prejudice, fear, or acts of hostility directed towards individual Muslims or followers of Islam in general. In addition to individual acts of intolerance and racial profiling, Islamophobia can lead to viewing and treating Muslims as a greater security threat on an institutional, systemic, and societal level. Thank you.
Thank you. I now call on Greece, followed by Finland on behalf of the EU.
Thank you, Madam Moderator. Following up on a statement made earlier, I would like to point out that in the recent past, some extremist groups in my country have attempted to use both the financial and the unprecedented migration and refugee crisis as a pretext for committing despicable criminal acts and for advancing a heinous political agenda. However, both our institutions and the Greek people have successfully resisted such efforts. We have put in place over the years a robust legislative, judicial, and operational framework against racism and hate crimes, also in cooperation with ODIHR. Leaders and members of the extremist Golden Dawn Party were brought to justice. Their trial is now reaching its final stage. In the recent elections held last July, that party failed to enter parliament. Furthermore, the unparalleled influx of migrants and refugees has not led to a rise of anti-foreigner sentiment among the Greek population. These are positive developments which encourage us in strengthening our efforts to combat racism, racial discrimination, and hate crimes. Thank you.
Thank you. I call on Finland on behalf of the EU, followed by the United Kingdom.
Thank you, Madam Moderator. I will pass the floor to the representative of the EU delegation.
Thank you, Madam Moderator. The full statement will be distributed. I just make some points right now. In reply to some remarks during the session, we reiterate again our well-known position on the illegal annexation of the Autonomous Republic of Crimea and the city of Sevastopol by the Russian Federation, which we condemn and do not recognize. We use again the opportunity to call for full compliance with international human rights standards in the Autonomous Republic of Crimea and the city of Sevastopol. And as we already heard so many calls addressed to us to visit Crimea, we trust that this invitation is extended to, together with full and unrestricted access to the OSCE SMM, OSCE institutions, as well as to all international human rights monitoring missions and human rights non-governmental organizations. Regarding the conflict between Russia and Georgia of August 2008, let me reiterate our firm support for the sovereignty, independence, and territorial integrity of Georgia within its internationally recognized borders, as well as the policy of non-recognition and engagement concerning the Georgian regions of South Ossetia and Abkhazia. In reply to the Russian Federation, let me reiterate that the EU is committed to combating all forms of intolerance and discrimination in an inclusive and comprehensive manner, based on the universality of human rights as reflected also in the OSCE commitments. And finally, in reply to the intervention questioning the existence of hate crimes and implying that there is no such definition, we would like to draw attention to the MC decision 9090 from Athens, where we all committed that hate crimes are criminal offenses committed with a biased motive. Thank you.
Thank you. I call on the United Kingdom, followed by Poland.
Thank you. Some quick replies. In response to the Russian Federation, who noticed an increase in reported hate crime in the UK from 2017 to 2018, the statistics on hate crime paint a complex picture. Yes, there was an increase in reporting during that period, thought to some extent to reflect a rise in hate crime around specific events such as the Westminster Bridge terrorist attack in 2017. But police data, which we have reported annually to ODIHR, showing an increase in reporting, reflects to improved identification of hate crime by the police, willingness of victims to come forward, and an overall improvement in how police now record crime. We have seen from data provided by the Crime Survey for England and Wales a welcome fall in people's experiences of hate crime from the previous reporting period. We encourage all participating states, including the Russian Federation, to work with ODIHR to improve their responses to all bias-motivated crimes. On what is a hate crime? In Athens, in 2009, participating states agreed that hate crimes are criminal offences committed with a biased motive. And in the UK, a hate crime is any criminal offence which is perceived by the victim or any other person to be motivated by hostility or prejudice based on a person's actual or perceived race, religion, sexual orientation, disability, or transgender identity. And quickly to the speaker from René Cassin, thank you very much for addressing this meeting. The first contact that a victim has with police is critical in identifying and understanding hate crimes, and the National Police Chiefs Council, with support from agencies, is working to improve the effectiveness of police call handlers. We'd be happy to follow up on any specific issues around treatments of victims in the UK. Thank you.
Thank you. I now call on Poland, followed by Azerbaijan.
Thank you, Madam Moderator. And using my right of reply, I would like to say that Poland remains committed to combating hate crimes, and the Polish law criminalizes discriminatory acts motivated by national, ethnic, religious, or racial factors. Hate crimes are included in the priorities of the Chief Commander of the Police and the Police Action Plan, according to which the prevention activities should counter any instances of radicalization. And all provinces and the Warsaw HQ have appointed coordinators for fighting hate crimes, and we also have a good cooperation in this regard with ODIHR, for example, in implementation of the training against hate crimes for law enforcement, and we're grateful to ODIHR for its support. Thank you.
Thank you. I now call on Azerbaijan, followed by Bulgaria.
Thank you. I wanted to answer to the representatives from Armenia. About the Ramil Safarov. Ramil Safarov was insulted and by the hate crime and sentenced his crime in Hungary, then came to back Azerbaijan, then by the Azerbaijani government was pardoned. About the 2016, I wanted to emphasize that by Armenian troops violated ceasefire regime many times, and one of these times was in 2016 in April, and that's why our troops defend themselves. That's all. Then, but our Armenian government don't commit the four resolution security councils of the UN, 822, 853, 874, and 884. There were declared the unconditional withdrawal of Armenian aggression troops from the Azerbaijani lands. And your PM, Pashinyan, going to the unrecognizable lands of the Azerbaijan in the Nagorno-Karabakh and declares its land of as Armenian land, but it's not Armenian land, it's Azerbaijani historically lands. About the hate crime, can you tell me how many people Azerbaijan? Please, 1 second. 1 second, please.
I'm sorry, your time is complete. We need to move to the next right of reply for Bulgaria, followed by Italy.
Madam Moderator, Bulgaria fully aligns itself with the right of reply made by the EU, and I would like to add the following in national capacity. In reply to some remarks made during this session, I would like to reiterate our well-known position on the illegal annexation of the Autonomous Republic of Crimea and the city of Sevastopol by the Russian Federation. Regarding the situation with the rights of persons belonging to national minorities, we echo the call for full and unrestricted access to the peninsula for the SMM, OSCE institutions, as well as for the international human rights monitoring missions and human rights non-governmental organizations. As for the rights of persons belonging to the Bulgarian national minority on the territory of Ukraine, it is one of the priority issues, and we consider it bilaterally with our Ukrainian counterparts. Thank you so much.
Thank you. I now call on Italy, followed by Armenia.
Grazie.
Thank you. I would like to make a few comments concerning what was stated by the human rights activist who spoke about the situation in Italy. And so I want to exercise my right of reply. We have a number of standards set out in our law concerning citizens of racism, and in our criminal code, and in the legislation, we in fact have a law from 2015 that defines a category of vulnerable victims, and these are individuals who have been victims of discrimination or of hate crimes, and the liability to which the perpetrators can be subject has been strengthened. We have other national instruments, such as an observatory to, and this is part of the police force, to keep track of situations of discrimination, and this I think is an important contribution to the discussion of this morning. There is always a guarantee to respect to human dignity and apply the principle of non-discrimination. Now, the standards are in evolution, and we have a number of measures that are being developed to ensure that the close track is kept of hate crimes.
Remarks from our introducer.
Thank you, Madam Moderator. This is in response to the statement of Azerbaijani delegation. Just to measure the level of the respect to cultural heritage of Armenia, I would like just to emphasize that Azerbaijan annihilated thousands of medieval Armenian cross stones and destructed a 7th century Armenian church in Nakhichevan in order to wipe out anything Armenian from the areas where Armenians constituted majority just decades ago, and this is very well documented. Now, in response to the right of reply to the delegation of Azerbaijan, I took note that Azerbaijani delegation did not reject the concrete cases of atrocities that I referred in my statement, including the killing of the Armenian officer, and we understand why. The remarks were very illustrative and come as a clear manifestation of justifications of killings of Armenians and the glorification of hate crimes. Now, in response to the Azerbaijani Gongos, let me emphasize that Garagin Nezhde is the national hero of Armenians, whose resistance movement in Armenian province of Zangezur back in the beginning of the 20th century saved the Armenian population of Zangezur from massacres by Azerbaijani forces, while Azerbaijan's national hero is Ramil Safarov, and you all heard it now.
We have many heroes.
Regarding and also I would like to respond to the Azerbaijani Gongo. It should be recalled that Tehran, to whom he referred to, has been found innocent by the Berlin Independent Court.
I'm sorry, in order to be fair to everyone, we need to give everyone equal time. No, I'm sorry, I cut everyone off at 1 minute and 30 seconds, so please, of course, distribute your full remarks if you'd like to through the distribution center. With a few more remaining moments left, I would like to turn the floor back over to our introducer. Again, summing up her thoughts and any concluding remarks on the topic of today's working session, the participating states' compliance with the commitments to address hate crimes and the respective role of intergovernmental organizations.
Thank you very much, and thank you very much you all for the very frank and constructive dialogue. I just would like to say, first of all, that as very well been stated also by the EU represented and by the United Kingdom represented, hate crime is a clear concept and is a needed concept. And there's a consensus. There may be not a consensus regarding hate speech, which is a different topic, but every crime, an arson, a murder, injuries, damage to property that is committed when the victim is targeted just because of its race, of its color, of its gender, of its origin is a hate crime. And of course, that is much more serious because it makes much more harm, not only to the property or to the person, but also to the dignity of that person and of its community. And because that idea of dignity is in the core of all the system of fundamental rights, it has to be addressed specifically. If we don't tackle the hate crimes, a breach will be done in the society, and the trust will be lost, and that will surely have very bad effects regarding security within the community, no matter what the protected characteristics are. So I would like just to finish my statement and my intervention to thank the OSCE for the work they do, and to please ask them to go on in that way and to try to make a compilation of all the international laws. Really, for the states, there are so many different obligations, so different forums that we are so much work to do that it's very useful to have an integrated body of laws to work with. For the states, I have to say that in my work in the CERT and also when I have worked with the OSCE, I really have to say that they all work in good faith for the goals that are established. Maybe not, it's not easy, but I think they do the job. So, but I would like to ask them to take in account people in the field, social workers, civil servants, law enforcement, training. Please, if you don't make them aware of the job you are doing, of all these discussions, of all these commitments, then in the end it will be lost. And it's really a pity, because I think it's worth it. And to the civil society, who are key in establishing bridges between the institutions and the victims, I will ask them to go on in that way, in a constructive way, to help those who really need it. So thank you very much.
Thank you, and I'll take a brief moment of moderator's privilege to say thank you to all of the participating states here who have noted the excellent cooperation with many of you in the training programs that ODIHR provides on trainings on hate crimes for police, for prosecutors, around data collection, and also with civil society. And of course, to those of you who are still interested in any of these training programs in order to fulfill your OSCE commitments, we are of course ready to open those options to any of you here today. I would like to say a very strong thank you to all of the participants, to the civil society activists who have made their remarks and recommendations. I would also like to note that this afternoon session is also on the specially selected topic of hate crime, and it will specifically address a comprehensive approach to addressing hate crimes, the complementary roles of civil society in participating states, and note that of course many of you seem to have many contributions in that topic that you may want to contribute. I would also like to say a very warm thanks to our interpreters for their excellent job, and note that the speakers list will open an hour before the next session, which starts at 3 o'clock. Please do leave your headsets in the room, and I'm sure that there are many side events this afternoon in the lunch period that many of you will be interested in. So thank you again for participation, and we look forward to seeing you in the next session.